All right, guys, welcome to the stream. Today, we got a lot to cover. This is going to be a big show. This week, I have tried to get on the live stream multiple times, and you guys have probably noticed we moved the schedule on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I planned on being here for the Tuesday show. Wasn't able to do it again. And the reason why is what we're going to talk about today. I have been working on, along with the SAI team, we have been working on a story that was going to drop on the NDA database that has been wild, guys. Had a lot of twists and turns every time I thought we were ready to publish and talk about it, because that was the main thing that I wanted to talk about on the streams this week. We would run into something else and we'd have to stop and we'd have to pause and we'd have to make sure everything was, well, all of our ducks were in a row. And you're going to see why here in just a moment, because this is just a kind of a wild story that I think shows us a lot about the kind of hidden dangers or the hidden concerns maybe of the evangelical industrial complex. There's going to be some things that are a part of this story that just don't sound like probably they should be in the same sentence as ministries or as churches or as any of that. Now, I'm not saying that anybody's committed any sort of criminal behavior or anything like that. Not at all. I'm not even gonna, I'm not even gonna make assertions on whether things were wrong or right. But today, I'm gonna share my opinions on an article that we just published. If you just want the facts, go to spiritualabuse.institute. You can get that article. It is neutral. It is factual. But today, I'm gonna talk about this story for a couple of different segments. I'm gonna give you my opinion and my commentary. That is all that is for all of the Sue happy people. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to share my opinions and my commentary. They are just that. You may have different opinions than I do on this. My opinions are not necessarily the official opinions of SAI. But guys, I think we need to talk about this, because whether things were done right or wrong, I think we've got to start looking at how does the world see the church when we start operating not as much as the church, not as much as ministries, but we start operating more as the evangelical industrial complex, when some of these elements that feel so foreign to what Scripture teaches enters into the church. Is that good for us? Is that bad for us? And even if a church is doing something, a ministry is doing something, and they say, Jeff, it's not sinful. This thing we're not doing is sinful, a la NDAs. Many churches will tell us, Jeff, it's not immoral, it's not sinful. And if you look at the NDA database, we never tell anybody that it's immoral or sinful or wrong or criminal or anything like that. What we do is we say we think the public deserves to know, because these NDAs can be used in ways that hurt people, in ways that traumatize people, in ways that silence people. Because the church uses NDAs, it does not mean they are using them to silence people. It simply means that a silencing NDA could be used for that, okay? But when we have tools like that in the church, at some point, I think we got to ask better questions. And instead of asking, is this sinful? Is this wrong? I think we got to ask the question, is it above reproach? Is it good? Is it kingdom? Is it Christ-like? Is it above reproach, so that even if the watching world was to ask and say, hey, I'm not sure that looks like Jesus, could we defend it? Or maybe even more importantly, why would we use tools and things that we need to defend in that way, when the most important thing for the church is taking the gospel to a world who needs it and discipling people to follow in the way of Jesus? So I think we just got to ask some better questions about the things that we do in the church. This isn't always about sinful, right, wrong, good, evil, all of those things. Sometimes it's simply about, hey, Jesus called us to a higher standard. Let's live out that higher standard, because lives are at stake. Eternities are at stake. People are at stake. People matter to God, so they got to matter to us. So that's where we're going today. What I want to do in probably 3 segments, okay? What we're going to do is we're going to talk about this article, right? We're going to talk about this article. It's just published. You guys are going to hear about it before it's shared on Instagram, before it's shared anywhere else on social media. So you will actually hear about the different pieces and elements of this article. You can actually read along with it. You can read it while you're listening to the live stream. You're going to hear about it before we promote it to anybody else. But we're going to look at a ministry that not only went on the NDA database, but the way that all of this unfolded was just unsettling to me. And I'm going to share it with you. Maybe it's unsettling to you. Maybe it's not. I'm going to share my opinion and commentaries on that. And I want to see what you think. So be ready to give your opinions on this one. And I say ministry because For those of you that don't know, the NDA database is not always churches. Sometimes it is Christian ministries that are doing ministry at churches and doing ministry within the church, not just individual local corporate expressions, but the institution of the church, because we're all the church. So we're all held to a biblical standard of the church, whether an organization is technically a church or just a ministry corporation. Okay. But that's what we're going to do for segment number one. We're going to talk about that story. I'm going to give you the facts, but I'm also going to give you a lot of my opinions on that. For segment number two, I want to look deeper at one of the players, one of the main characters in this article, one of the main characters in this story, someone I didn't expect to enter the chat on this one, okay? But they're here, and I think this player being here makes us ask a lot of questions about the ministry machine and the big evangelical industrial complex. What happens when the industrial complex of evangelicalism and the ministry machine attack? What we're going to talk about how the evangelical industrial complex, it's a mixture of a lot of different elements. You got the church, you got faith, you got people pursuing Jesus. But what happens when people pursuing Jesus as the church also mixes with things like corporate business? What happens when it mixes with lawyers and attorneys and courts and legal posturing and legal threats? What happens when it mixes with things like NDAs? What happens when it mixes with, all sorts of just different stuff that, again, takes us from being the church to sometimes operating in ways that seem inconsistent with the church. So we're going to talk about the hypocrisy that I see. Again, my opinion, the hypocrisy that I see in the evangelical industrial complex. And I'm going to let you decide, do you see that hypocrisy as well? Because I think it's illustrated through a deeper dive into how one of these players kind of entered into this. And I'm not going to say this person's a good person, a bad person. I don't know this person. We're simply going to talk about some of the things that makes me question, is this hypocrisy, and is this a very concerning hypocrisy in the evangelical industrial complex? Or am I just overreacting? So you guys are going to let me know as well on that one. And then the final segment, we're going to react to a video from someone who has was on church staff. This is not just a Christian. This is a person who was on church staff. They were a pastor. And over the past years, they have fully deconstructed, not just in the way that I've deconstructed from my faith, where I deconstructed and reconstructed, but they've deconstructed and, as far as I know, have left the faith. Okay, so how do you have someone who is a pastor, who's on church staff, who's sacrificing for the ministry, and they're giving their life to the things of Jesus? How do you have someone who goes from that to all of a sudden they're not a believer and they're really struggling with the church because of the damage and the hurt that has been done to them by the church? So we're going to react to a video from this person, and we're going to talk about how spiritual manipulation shows up in Big Eva so often, and how spiritual manipulation, even when it's unintentional, can turn very quickly into spiritual abuses. Not because a person's a bad person and an abuser and they're intentionally trying to hurt people, but because they abuse their power and authority and influence within the church, and just how easy that is to happen. So that's kind of the rundown, the plan for today. As always, the different pieces of these segments will eventually be turned into standalone videos. You're probably going to see the one on the NDA article. It's probably going to come very fast. So if you just want to get to those videos quickly, you don't want any communication with the chat, you don't want any of the other live stream stuff, you're already tired of the intro because you're like, Jeff, you're taking too long, I don't want to hear about all this, just get into it. If that's you, the standalone videos may be better for you. Watch for those. They are going to come out. You can also go and read the article at spiritualabuse.institute, okay? But today, in between each segment, as we always do in the live streams, this is unedited, this is unfiltered, okay? There's going to be a lot of things that are edited out. There's going to be a lot of dead spaces. I'm probably going to make mistakes in this, because this is not the polished version that you are going to see when we put out these standalone videos. But also, there's no teleprompter. There's no scripted plan. This is just a real conversation between me and you. And in between the segments, I want to hear from you. So we'll jump into the chat before we get going into segment number one. So if you have any questions, you have any concerns, you have any thoughts, you just want to pop in, say, hey, let us know where you're watching from, any of those sort of things, do that now. And we'll jump into the chat here in just a second, but also throughout the stream today. If you have any questions, you have any thoughts, you have any concerns, you have topics you want us to talk about in the future, if you think I got something really right, really wrong, or you think there's nuance that maybe I'm missing, all of those things are fair game. Jump in the chat, be active. These streams, I think, are the best when you all are the most active because honestly, you are my favorite part of the streams, not me. But again, we'll get in the chat here in just a second, and then we are going to jump in today because we got a lot to cover. I think it's going to be fun. I also think it's going to be frustrating at times. I think it's going to be a little sickening at times. But I think these are conversations that we need to have. And you guys are going to see. You're going to get a front row seat to what happens when someone or an organization decides we're going to stand for truth, transparency, accountability, and our convictions. When you do, the machine attacks. And I think you're going to see that today because it felt to me in a lot of ways for this story like the machine just flat out attacked. I don't think the machine expected us to just bring transparency and accountability to that. I think that's going to surprise some people. Who knows? Maybe there's more that comes from this. But when people step up and try to do the right thing, this is why so many people are scared to talk about these issues. They're scared to stand on their convictions. They're scared to talk about spiritual abuse because there can be a lot to lose and there can be a lot of fear in those things. The good news with SAI is, man, we have a mission. We're on a mission. We want to see a transparent, accountable, and healthy church. We want to see the church do well, but we don't have a lot to lose. We have a mission, and we're going to do our best to accomplish that mission. But nobody's getting rich off SAI, which means we don't have the same things that we could potentially lose that a lot of these big ministries and churches do. Sometimes that's frustrating, but I think overall it's actually really helpful. But let's go ahead and jump into the chat, see if who is here today, and if there are any questions before we jump in. And then we are going to jump in. Y'all will get to see me react to our very first cease and desist letter live on the stream. Thanks so much, Abby, for being here. For those that don't know, Abby is one of our moderators. So thank you for being here today. I'm flying solo. I don't have a producer today. So while I'm doing all this, Abby is going to be making sure that the chat goes smoothly. So thank you so much for that. Let me see. So the tea is going to be piping hot, as the youth say. I don't really know what the youth are saying because half the stuff my kids say right now makes no sense. I'm just trying to figure out 6-7 right now. But yeah, there's a lot of tea today. And hopefully, if nothing else, churches and ministries understand we're not against you. We want to have open conversations. We'd love to have your comments and share them with people. We want to be really fair. So even if I disagree with what you're saying personally, I'm going to put it out there for people. But hopefully it also lets ministries know that there are good dialogue is great. Even if you want to go with no comment, that's an option. But hopefully these kind of responses, churches and ministries are going to go, oh, wow, they're going to be transparent about that too. Maybe that's not the way that we want to go because I don't think those are helpful. But there is a lot going on today. Chrissy's here, says, I'm glad to catch you live. Glad that you are here as well, Chrissy. Real Frank Stone says, add up all the organization's conversion figures and you end up with more people that exist on earth. Frank, you are going to see some wild figures today. Okay. When I had to send this article to my editor for final editing, oh my gosh, because one of our board members is a journalist by day. They've been journalists for a long time. So they helped me out with all this. And when I sent this to them for final editing, that was one of the things that surprised them was some of the numbers that are out there. I'm not saying that they're not real, but there's some big numbers you're going to see in this story today. Frank also says the deconstruction rhetoric is an indicator that someone is desperate to be relevant and considered cool. I think that misses the plot, man. And we got a lot of videos on that, Frank, that you can actually check out. But most people I have talked to, and again, I actually talked to a lot of deconstructors. I'm one myself. Most people who deconstruct are reforming. They're deconstructing, reforming, and reconstructing their faith. They're not trying to be relevant or cool because the pain and trauma that comes with that. I have never met someone who deconstructed who didn't go through significant trauma. It comes on the other side of trauma and pain and a lot of times spiritual abuse, right? It's not what they want. I've never met a single person that's just like, you know what, this would be cool. Now, do some try to turn it into fame and try to turn it into all those things? Maybe, but I don't know that it's worth any of that. So I think deconstruction is normally more the indication of somebody, man, they're asking really deep, hard questions. And unfortunately, instead of the church coming alongside people when they do that, which is something that I tried to do so that you can ask really tough, uncomfortable questions and we can pursue truth together, right? But instead of the church helping a lot of people do that, what we do instead is we villainize and demonize deconstruction. I mean, you just want to sin more, you just want all that sort of stuff. And I talked about that with Ruslan earlier in the summer on a show that we did together, right? On our first podcast interview. I think because we villainize deconstruction so much and we minimize it instead of walking with people, I think a lot of people who are walking away from the faith, it's because no one from the faith was willing to walk with them and help them find truth. And so they're finding all these issues and concerns and questions. They don't know how to deal with them, so they don't walk their way back to truth. One of the best things that we could do as the church is not villainize deconstruction, but walk with people through it and really get back to the point where we believe that God is big enough to answer people's tough questions. The Bible's big enough to handle people's tough questions. And I think when we do that, my experience, again, talking to more deconstructors than I can count at this point, is that most of them are simply, they're trying to deal with trauma and they're trying to pursue truth. Something has given them a jolt. Something has made them realize that at least part of what they were taught as faith may not be completely true or hold water. And it's a very difficult thing to go through. So I would just encourage you all, and again, everybody can have their own opinion, but I would encourage people, and I always push back when I hear, opinions that are villainizing a deconstruction, like listen to some deconstructors, have some empathy with them, pray for them, because at the end of the day, it's not something somebody wanted. And we want them to be able to find truth. I know on the other side of asking tough questions about my faith is stronger than ever. And that's where I see the majority of deconstructors end up. Most deconstructors never stop considering themselves Christians, if that makes sense. So I think it's gotten a very bad rap in those situations. Let me see. Linda says, Frank, I disagree. I came from Foursquare and Assembly of God churches and had to deconstruct from mandatory tithing to New Testament giving. Had nothing to do with relevance or attention. Yeah, Linda, we hear a lot of stories like that. So thank you for sharing. I don't think that a couple of people have said niceness. I don't think that Frank was being. I don't think that Frank was not being nice, right? Like that's not the way that I took it, at least anyway. I think that was just that's his opinion based on his experience with deconstructors, right? So I didn't take it any real bad way, and I understand why others would. But what I've found is a lot of people who say that, again, even when I had that conversation with Ruslan, it's, hey, how many deconstructors have you talked to, right? And I find that most people who have those thought processes, that, man, they've been told that, they've seen a couple of examples of that, so maybe it's reality to them, but they haven't had a lot of conversations and experience with deconstructors and deconstruction. So it can make sense how they get there. I want to have empathy on both sides. Invisible Jesus by Scott McKnight and Tommy Priest Phillips. We had them on the podcast last year around this time in the fall. They have a great book on actually looking into doing research on deconstruction, talking to a lot of people in the book, and finding that a lot of people, their kind of assertion is, hey, as we look at people who are deconstructing, a lot of people are feel like they have to leave the church trying to find Jesus. They're not just wanting to sin more. They're not just running away, all that sort of stuff. So I would encourage you, Frank, to potentially read that book. You won't agree with everything in it, but I think it's got some very good information. But I didn't take that as unnice right off the bat, right? Let me see. Hey, did you know that you can break a business landline? Oh my gosh, I did not know that. I'm not sure how you accomplished that today, Abby, but maybe it gives you more time for the live stream. Frank says, I guess still talking about deconstruction, it banks on being fashionable by borrowing from deconstruction philosophy. Again, man, I would push back and just say we could have a longer conversation about this, but I've already had those. One, it's not fashionable for most people. That doesn't hold water. That's just, that argument falls apart. Also, when people talk about deconstruction philosophy, they're usually talking about Derrida's deconstruction, which is totally different from faith deconstruction. I talked to Ruslan about that as well. If you actually look deep into it, it really only shares the name. And again, man, I'm talking to so many people who have deconstructed. Most of them, they can't tell you anything about Derrida's philosophy because it has nothing to do with that. So when people try to pair those two together, it sounds good. And if you don't do any research, it sounds good because then you can just label people as some sort of like woke or socialist. It doesn't hold water when you actually hold the conversations, right? Again, deconstruction, as it's talked about in the faith world today, is much closer aligned to the Protestant Reformation than Derrida's work. So we got to be careful with that. Let me see. Its use among the religious is another example of Thomasese hiding behind ambiguities. I would be curious, Frank. How many deconstructors have you had a conversation with? A deep, like more than an hour-long conversation listening to them. How many deconstructors have you had a conversation with like that in the last year? I would be curious. My guess, based on how you're talking about this, and again, not trying to be mean, but based on how you're talking about this, my guess is that number is super low because none of this actually matches the reality that I have experienced. Let me see. Let's go ahead. I'll get one more from Frank, and then we'll jump into this today. The bottom line is if someone cannot handle their own teenager skepticism, their parental authority as well as their culture is over. All right. Frank, I'm not sure who you are. I'm going to try to be nice here. But again, I'm going to be a little firmer because I think you're struggling with the plot here. That's an ignorant comment because the majority of deconstructions isn't happening with teenagers. It's not involving parents. You're not looking at any data. You're just kind of off the cuff, sharing a bunch of crap, and it just doesn't hold water. Okay. And again, trying to be nice, we can talk about these things. We can talk about data. We can talk about experiences. We can talk about conversations. But to label deconstruction as something that just teenagers and bad parents are dealing with is, I mean, honestly, it's one of the most ignorant things I've ever heard. That is, most people who are deconstructing are not teenagers. Teenagers are, for the most part, still forming their faith. The people who are deconstructing, we're talking about adults with fully formed brains who are asking questions. And again, bro, I'm a deconstructor. I've never walked away from my faith. I have multiple theology degrees. I can talk about this all day with you. Deconstruction was a matter of, hey, I'm pulling these elements apart of my faith, and I'm asking questions about them. I'm asking if they hold water, because a lot of the same people who villainize deconstruction think a lot of things about the Bible are true that weren't true to the first century audience that the New Testament was written to. So I would just encourage you to have a little bit more humility, have a few more conversations, do a little bit more research, because I think we could have a good conversation about deconstruction, but you got to take some leaps because you're far behind on where we need to be to actually have that conversation if you think it's just an issue with teenagers. But let's get into the NDA thing, because I believe that is kind of the main thing that most of you are here for today. And we are not here to have the conversation about deconstruction. That is a great topic, but it's a different topic for a different day. But Frank, I appreciate you being here, man. I appreciate you bringing it up, and I love that this is a safe place where we can disagree. So anyway, let's go ahead and let's jump into this discussion of this article, this story, and how NDAs kind of worked their way into it. I think you're going to find it fascinating. Non-disclosure agreements, cease and desist letters, legal threats, legal posturing, backdoor conversations trying to potentially stop an article about a church's reported use of NDAs. All of that and more is a part of the article that we just published today, because this week we finished some work that we've been doing for over a month looking into a ministry that was reported to us to use silencing NDAs. And guys, what started as a really boring run-of-the-mill NDA use story, because a lot of ministries use NDAs. And The reason why we do this NDA database is because we're trying to shed light on a common practice in the church that most parishioners and ministry donors are not aware of. And by shining light on that, we're simply trying to have conversations. We want people to be able to have conversations about, hey, is this something that we believe should happen in the church? If our church or ministry is using this, why? Because we believe transparency and accountability help to prevent some things that maybe are innocuous or maybe weren't meant to be bad. It helps prevent them from turning into spiritual abuse, right? So this NDA project, when we ask churches about this and we get their comments, our assumption is there's probably a lot they don't know about NDAs. And the majority of the time, here's the two responses we get. The majority of the time, we either get a no comment or we get a comment that shows the church is not intentionally trying, at least with their comment, they're not intentionally trying to hurt people with the NDAs, but it usually shows they have a misunderstanding of how these NDAs could be used to silence people, especially in the wrong hands. But this time, we had a totally different response. We actually had multiple responses that I have never seen. So we're going to get into that today. But before I give you those details, a couple of important disclaimers. And you're going to see why these are important here in just a second, because boy, some ministries and churches, they just love to sue and threaten to sue, which I totally don't get. That's a part of the topic that we're doing today. But to be clear, if you just want the facts, the neutral facts of this article, that is at spiritualabuse.institute. Click on articles. You can read it right there. This video is going to be me discussing many of those facts, but I'm also going to share my opinions. I'm going to share commentary. My opinions are not necessarily the opinions of SAI, and you got to make up your own mind about all this stuff. At the same time, this is in the article. I'll probably say it multiple more times because, again, ministries and churches get sue happy, so we have to be very, very careful with all this stuff. But I'm not saying this ministry is bad. I'm not saying this ministry is doing anything wrong. I'm not saying any of that. I'm not even saying that their use of NDAs is intentional, okay? All we are saying, we're going to talk about it today. This was reported to us, and then this is how the investigation for this article went. But I think there's some important things that we got to learn from this, but at the same time, the church just has to discuss it, even if we disagree. And you in the chat may disagree with me, but I think we have to discuss these. But let's go ahead and get into this. I'm going to pull this article up so that you can see it with me today. And you're going to see right there, brand new article on the left, Florida evangelist sends cease and desist as a response to NDA questions. And you're going to see the leader of this ministry we're going to talk about is Ankit Rambabu. And if you're not familiar with Ankit Rambabu and Ankit Rambabu Ministries, this is an evangelistic ministry. This is a healing ministry. Think like, when you got like healing televangelists and stuff like that, it's kind of in that line. This is a ministry where they send out Ankit. He does a lot of different crusades and stuff where they're sharing the gospel and they're doing healing services. Now, regardless of where you're at on that, we have people from all kinds of different theological backgrounds, okay? But regardless of where you're at on that, this is the kind of services they're doing. They're doing the kind of healing services where you got catchers, you got people falling on the floor. That's just a part of what this is. So that may be a part of your background, maybe something you believe in. It may not, but that's what this ministry does. Okay. So what we went ahead and did was in the article, we say, hey, here's who this ministry is. Here's why they're on the database. It was reported to us, as always, through the database, or most of the time through the database. It was reported to us by an anonymous source. Hey, here's an NDA. It is used by this ministry. We don't even know who this source was. We can't trace it. Okay, so here's what we have to do. When someone makes a report of a church using an NDA, we have to do a couple of things. And you can look at our whole process because we link that in the article. But if someone reports that to us and they don't have the document, then we need multiple people to go on the record about it. Okay, that means they put their name to it. All right. Now, most people don't want to put their name to this information about NDAs, even if they found it out in legal ways, right? Even if they're able to do this, because a lot of people have found this out through various channels. They haven't done anything nefarious, but they found this out and it concerns them, okay? But even when they do that, they don't know if ministries are going to retaliate. And given the response that we got for trying to report on this, I can see, and I think you're going to see why people would be concerned about retaliation. So if we don't have multiple people going on the record, the only other way that we can actually report on this is we need an anonymous source can give us a document. The document goes through some tests. We review it. If it passes our process, then we do an article on it and we add the church or the ministry to the NDA disclosure database. Okay, so that's what happened here. But let's talk about Ankit Rambabu Ministries just a little bit more. Okay, ARB, that's what is going to be our shorthand for them. Again, they're an evangelistic and healing ministry. Let's think about some of these numbers, though. I told you there are going to be some really big numbers here. According to their website, this ministry has reached over 12,000 people in 4 years. Now, they don't really describe what reached means, but any ministry reaching 12,000 people in person in 4 years is a big deal. So this is a fast growing ministry. They've got over Ankit himself has over 100,000 followers on Instagram. The ministry has about 20,000 followers. So again, there's a big social media reach. There's a big in-person reach. And this guy's pretty young. He's only 30. Ankit is 30 years old, okay? But he's doing massive events. He's doing nationwide tours. And you see this picture of him right there on the left. That's him and his wife at Mar-a-Lago, right? And he talks about this. It was great to see the president's home. He was invited there by other pastors and influencers. So this is a guy who is not only growing in ministry, he is growing in influence. And one of the things we always look at with NDA churches that and ministries that are reported to use NDAs, we always look to see how much influence they have, because some of these churches, it's just really impacting them and their church, them and their ministry, them and their donors and parishioners, okay? But for others, like Life Church and Seacoast, which are also on the database, you can read articles about those, they're influencing and impacting other big churches nationwide and even globally, okay? So the more influence an organization has, I think the more careful they need to be when using tools like this and the deeper questions they have to ask. So this is a 4-year-old ministry, but it's growing fast, and Ankit's got a ton of influence, okay? Here's some other big numbers for you, though. Again, I can't corroborate these, so I'm not saying they're true or they're not, but these are massive numbers for a 4-year-old ministry led by a 30-year-old. So if they're true, bravo, he's doing a really good job. The ministry boasts eye-popping numbers such as 26,641 salvations, so almost 30,000 salvations, and more than 12,000 miracles. Remember when I told you this is a ministry around evangelism and healing, okay? So what they're saying is we've had 26,000 salvations and we've had 12,000, almost half of that, miracles. They also plan to reach 36 cities nationwide this year. You see their tour. This is a picture originally of their tour dates, but they're adding more because this, of course, finishes in September. If you go on the website right now, you'll see they're taking a Festival of Miracles event to, I believe it's New Orleans, okay? But it's here in just about a week or so. So they're going to be doing events all throughout the end of the year, trying to reach 36 different cities. Okay. On the ARB website, they tell the whole story about how Ankit got started, kind of an experience with God, very experiential thing when he was 13. Okay. But it says this, and again, these are big numbers. His first crusade had an attendance of over 100,000 people. Now, I don't know if that was like one crusade event or if that was like a tour. I don't know how they counted those, but if you're getting into this when you're 13 or so, and your very first crusade, I believe in India still at that time, has over 100,000 people, then again, we're talking about somebody with global influence. And it says, this is not me, this is them. Ankit has gone on to win more than 7 million recorded souls to the kingdom of God through mass crusade meetings. So this is a guy who's saying, hey, we've had over the last 4 years in the United States, 26,000 some odd salvations, but we've had like 7 million people. And he says they're recorded. I would love to know how those are recorded, because even just keeping record of 7 million people is very, very difficult, especially when you're talking about different countries and everything else. So I would love to know information about that. But as you're going to see here in just a little bit, because of cease and desist and things that were sent to us, I can't ask them any other questions. All right. So I will not be asking them any other questions or asking for clarification. All I can do is wonder out loud. But again, if that is true, man, you've got 7 million people that you've reached. You've got 12,000 miracles. That's a huge ministry impact. And you see right here a promo for his Festival of Miracles, because he's going to churches, he's going through tents all that sort of stuff. We're just popping up for a few days, for a week. We're doing these events, we're doing the healings, we're sharing the gospel, and then we are back out. Okay. Now, this is also a pretty big ministry from a financial standpoint. Okay. So we'll compare this. They're doing really well. SAI has brought in less than $40,000 for this entire year. I think less than $35,000 at the last check for everything that we're doing. That's including insurance, legal fees, all that sort of stuff, right? We don't have any full-time employees. We're not paying anybody just a regular wage. We're not doing any of that. So we're a small nonprofit in our second year. This nonprofit is in their fourth year, yet they're 990s. We have one from 21 and we have one from 22. Okay. Their 22 990 form, which you can actually click if you go to the article, you can see the actual 990 form. So you don't just have to take our word for it. But their 2022 990 was their latest available disclosure because, man, there's a lot of things that just hold those things up. They don't have a disclosure on their website. Like we put one out every couple of months. They don't have one on their website. So 2022, that 990 form, which was really in like their second, third year, that's the last that we could see. But in that year, they had 8 employees and 1.38 million in income and contributions. So they're already bringing in almost 1.5 million in just a couple of years. Based on the growth of the ministry, I would assume that number has grown as well. But even the first year, the very first year, if you look at that 990, their first full year, they brought in more than $1 million. So this is a big enterprise. This is a big ministry with big donors, and they're not done. Okay. According to their website, the vision for the next 3 years is nothing short of spectacular. They had the expectation of witnessing the greatest revival that America's ever experienced. They talk about transcending boundaries. They want to make a mark on the nation. Okay. But here was my question. This is my big question for this whole article. Is NDA use a part of this grand ministry plan? Because I love that you want to reach as many people as possible. But is NDA use a part of that plan, or did it just happen? But if NDA use is a part of this plan, is it necessary? Can you help me understand when you're going to city after city and you're seeing salvations like crazy and you're seeing miracles like crazy and God is moving in that way, is an NDA necessary? Or are NDAs actually something that could cause reproach to the good ministry that you're doing? That's, of course, a question that Ankit would have to be a part of answering, and I can't reach out to Ankit anymore. So you also see another, you saw the Festival of Miracles earlier. Sometimes they do events called Tents of Miracles when they don't have a place to go. You see that right there, okay? We do talk about in the article what we consider a silencing NDA, why we added this ministry. You can go to our website and see all of the elements of silencing NDAs. But basically, a silencing NDA is any NDA that has one or more elements that could be used to silence a person about their experience, keep them from being honest and open and transparent about their experience, or cause them to lie or something like that, okay? Again, just because those elements are in an NDA and we consider it a silencing NDA doesn't mean that's the church's intention, but what it does mean is it can be used for that. That's things like non-disparagement clauses. That's things like non-mutual terms. That's things like overly broad confidentiality clauses. We list all of those things on our website. But let's get to what we do with every single ministry, every single church that comes through this. What we do is we reach out to them, assuming the best. We let them know we've received an NDA that qualifies as a silencing NDA. If it doesn't pass our test, we don't report on it. So if we're reaching out to you for comment, we've received an NDA that fits our definition of a silencing NDA, and then we ask for comment. We ask some very specific questions, which you can see on the website. Hey, are you still using NDAs? If you stopped, why? What was the purpose of these? Do people know? All that sort of stuff, okay? But we ask those questions, and we ask them to give any other comment or clarity, provide anything they want the public to know. So we've got some specific questions, but they can tell us anything. And then we let them know we're going to do our best to share your unedited, unaltered comments. Like, we want to represent you fairly, because you may say, hey, yes, we use NDAs. Here's exactly why. And then, hey, that's there for the public to know. People can decide how they feel about that, because, again, we're not saying these churches are bad for using NDAs. We're saying we think this is something that the public should know, okay? Because NDAs, like it or not, have been involved in a lot of spiritual abuse cases. So a church using them doesn't mean they're spiritually abusive, but they have been tied to too many spiritual abuse cases for us to ignore how they can be used potentially in sinful or hurtful or even just traumatic ways. So what did Ankit Rambabu Ministries say when we reached out to them? Okay, so you see right here, we contacted them on September 17th. You see a message that I sent through Instagram because it was very difficult. Some of these ministries and churches, you can find phone numbers really easy. You can find emails really easy. We always try to go through email so there is a paper trail. But this one was very hard to find. I actually didn't find an email for them until today because there's only one place where I found that. But you can actually see before it was sent, you can see what I copied and pasted and put right there if you want to see the whole thing. Okay. But you can see outside of the whole thing, you can see right there the screenshot, match it to the template, and you're going to actually see what we sent them. You see the screenshot right there, September 17th. We reached out to them. You see the questions that we asked them. We did not receive a comment from them, and I did not reach out to them again until right here. You see this, September 30th. And all I said on September 30th, you can read the screenshot fully, but basically it was, this is a friendly reminder your deadline's approaching, because we had a deadline to start working on this article. Okay. Now, this thing took a lot longer than I expected, and part of it was because of their responses and everything else, trying to be very careful with it. But yeah, so we reached out once on September 17th, and we reached out on September 30th with just a reminder. Hey, we sent this on September 17th. The deadline's coming up. Let us know if you need anything. Okay. So we didn't receive a response from ARB directly. What we received from their attorney was this. Okay. And this is a cease and desist letter via email. Okay. We're going to walk through all of this. We're going to walk through all the things they said, because there's a bunch of what to me is very bogus stuff here. We answer it in the article in detail, but we'll go through all of this. But it's, they talk about us making unwarranted threats. You see the all caps, please govern yourself accordingly, all that sort of stuff. So our only response from ARB, hey, it's been reported to us that a silencing NDA has been used. We, do you have any comment? Here's some questions that we have. We'll share your comment. And the answer was to send us a cease and desist, essentially threatening legal action if we didn't do what they wanted, okay, which is specifically not contacting Ankit, which I'm honoring. But it also felt like this whole thing was a, hey, don't talk about this, don't report on this. And that is not simple. That's not our position at SAI. When we're going to report on the facts that we have, we're not going to be intimidated out of reporting something and out of not following our processes because a lawyer writes a nasty letter. Okay. That's when the press starts doing that. When journalists start doing that, that's when we get journalism that isn't helpful. Okay. Freedom of press is there for a reason, because you need to have people who are bold in journalism, people who are bold in the press that say, we're going to report the facts the best that we can. We're going to let people make decisions, but we're going to report this to the public, and we're not going to be bullied out of doing it. And whether that was their intention or not, cease and desist to me feel like a bullying tactic. When I get them, I feel like I'm being bullied out of writing a story. So we honored what we could. We didn't honor what we could. But here's the thing. That wasn't the only thing that we got from them. Okay. A couple of things I want you to know. One, you see right here, September 30th was when we sent the reminder, 5:56 p.m. It was before 10 o'clock, if I remember correctly. Within just a few hours, we had this cease and desist letter. Okay. September 30th. You see it right there. I don't have the specific timestamp on this one, but I believe it was before 10. It was literally the same day. We sent them a nice reminder. You can read this. You let me know. Do you feel like this was mean? I didn't feel like this was mean. It was a friendly reminder. We even called it a friendly reminder because we want to make sure they have an opportunity to respond. We want to make sure that we share their response. And, we were hoping to get potentially a comment from them, maybe some answers to our questions, and not a cease and desist. Okay. But that response within just a few hours of our second communication wasn't the first response. So I want to show you that as well. Let me see. They actually gave us an indirect response first, and you can see this right here. We got, and I've redacted all the information from this person, but there's a third-party ministry contact that we both have, someone that I know and knows SAI, and had some connections with us and someone who has had connections with Ankit Rambabu Ministries. This is a person who thinks highly of both ministries. Okay. So essentially, what happened was Jess Rambabu, okay, Ankit's wife, reportedly sent a message to this person telling them they got this email from us. So they definitely received the comment request, according to this witness. Okay. They received the comment request, and instead of reaching out to us, they reached out to this mutual connection, which I'm sure they figured out probably based on Instagram or something like that. Hey, we know this person who's following them. And basically just they gave her a response, or gave this person a response and said, hey, today a friend of mine reached out to me. Her name is Jess Rambabu, married to Ankit. They're an evangelist. I don't know much about the situation, so I'm sorry if I'm inserting myself in it anyway, but I wanted to connect you all. She told me they only use NDAs for this reason. So again, I prefer direct commentary, direct comments, okay? But if a ministry is going to go through a backdoor channel to give us commentary, we will share that, okay? Unless they're asking specifically not for us to share that. And I got permission from this third party to share this for the sake of transparency, because we're not trying to hide anything from you. Sometimes ministries act like we're trying to manipulate a narrative or we're trying to hide something, when the reality is we're being as transparent as possible. That transparency is what bothers people. They want us to leave things out a lot of times, okay? But she told me they only use NDAs for this reason. You see it in red. We have NDAs because we have staff around 24/7. And when they have someone mentoring come in and they tell us personal information, or they're dealing with unaliving, or they're dealing with certain attractions, they're dealing with all sorts of different sins she puts out there, certain stuff that the YouTube algorithm is not going to like, okay? Our staff can't go spreading that information. That's good. I understand that, okay? Honestly, I'll say this, personal opinion, I don't even think we need NDAs for that. Every Christian should know that. I think seminaries need to start holding accountable. So do denominations, so do churches. If you share any sort of information like that, we're going to strip your ordination, okay? But this should just be Christian common sense. But if you need to use an NDA for it, we allow for that, okay? It said we have very high-profile influencers come around us for counseling, and we have to keep their privacy protected. We have databases of hundreds of thousands of phone numbers who come through, okay? We have to protect their privacy. So I get the mentoring and counseling. I get the phone numbers, okay? The high-profile influencers coming to you for counseling, I'm not sure what that matters, okay? High-profile influencers are not any more important than a poor person who can't give you any money who comes to a healing crusade, okay? There's no difference. They're all just as important, okay? Now, when I look at their GuideStar profile, okay, when I look at that, I don't see anything that talks about them counseling high-profile celebrities. When I look at their website, I don't see anything about that. What I see is that their mission is evangelism and these healing events, okay? So again, I don't really know what that has to do with that. I'm not sure what their background is for counseling these influencers or anything like that, but all of that is totally fine. And if they had sent us that response, that would have been a valid comment. It wouldn't be the first time that we have had a ministry tell us that. That would have been a valid comment, and we would have published it, but it wouldn't have had to be through this third party, okay? And again, this is just my opinion. I can't say this with certainty, but personally, it felt like they were going to a mutual friend, and it felt like they were leveraging or attempting to leverage that relationship to silence this story before it got started, okay? Now, when that doesn't work, because obviously it didn't work, when that doesn't work, they pivoted and they moved to the cease and desist, okay? But this person just said, hey, I copied and pasted the message. I told them you're fair and kind people. If they want to talk with you, I'll help if needed, okay? So this person's just like, hey, I bet if y'all talk, this would be fun, okay? And I said, thank you. This is part of the tension of this project and the need for it, without assigning motive, good or bad, because we're not assigning motive, good or bad, to this ministry or any church or ministry on this list, because their motive doesn't matter. Motive and intent does not erase impact. What we are interested in is that NDAs that have silencing NDA elements, they could potentially be used in ways that are harmful, hurtful, and keep people from telling the truth, okay? So you can have the best intentions, but what happens when you're gone? What happens when a founder's gone from a ministry and 30 years later, someone with not as good intentions comes in and uses these same kind of documents to silence people, okay? So again, We don't assign motive good or bad, but, and this is what I said, we simply have to address the factual concerns. And the factual concern is that we had an anonymous source report to us that NDAs were being used by this church or by this ministry. They fit our definition of silencing NDAs, and we're reporting on it. That's the facts here. Okay. So it's not about motive. It's not about intent. One of the things I did say was the NDA in question, the one that I looked at, the document that was sent to us, has multiple markers of a silencing NDA. And again, that's not news because we wouldn't report it. We wouldn't reach out for comment if it didn't have markers of a silencing NDA. If we had only got an NDA that did what they said, right? Protecting counseling information, protecting people's private phone numbers, all of that sort of stuff. If that's all it did, we wouldn't have reached out for comment. Actually, this week, this is wild. This week, I've had to turn away 3 separate submissions because I said, hey, yes, this is a non-disclosure agreement. It could function that way, but it doesn't have the markers or enough markers of a silencing NDA for us to be able to report it, right? So look, we're not going after every church and ministry that is sent over here. We're not reporting on everyone. We're reporting simply on the ones that fit our definition of a silencing NDA, okay? But I said, if it only had the information that they had shared with you, then it wouldn't qualify. We wouldn't have reached out to them. Some leaders use templates. Some, like they get these from HR firms. They get these from their lawyer. They get them from another ministry, okay? I'm owning that. We know that. We hear that from churches all the time. And we're not legal experts. We just got this template and we're using it, okay? Some leaders use templates and they don't know the damage that can be done. This is the conversation we have with these churches, though, and with these ministries. We totally understand that you may have gotten this as a template and there's no bad intentions here. I totally get that. I empathize with that. At the same time, now that you know the templates can be used potentially by bad actors to silence people, we usually let them know we still got to report on it, and we can help you redesign an NDA. If you go to episode 101 with Daniel Golding, he's a pastor who is using an NDA. I pointed out some problems with the NDA. We talked about it. They sat down with lawyers and they recreated an NDA that only does the stuff, literally only does the stuff protecting people that Jess told this third party connection about. Okay. So we can help them do that. We have no problem. And I offered to do that. This person asked if we'd be willing to get on a call and help with that. I told them we'd be willing to do that. They were excited, asked for permission to share the messages. I also reminded them right here, the goal is not to hurt anybody, okay? But to protect the church, the people of the church, because the church is the people, not the building. The church is the people in these churches. The church is the people in these ministries, at these healing crusades. We're all a part of the church. Our goal is to protect the church and everyone to make the most, and to help everyone make the most above reproach decisions as possible. So again, we're not assigning motive, good or bad. We're not trying to hurt anybody. And this person, of course, says, I love that you all are direct while being kind, or that you address this being kind and direct. We talked about light and transparency going a long way to fix it. They said, okay, here's the stuff that you sent me. I'm going to share that with them. This is what I'll send. And then here's where it turned. Okay, I sent this to them to discuss how they want to proceed. I told them you're easy to talk to if they want to go that way. So this contact still feels like at this point, hey, they're reaching out just because they wanted some mediation from another wise Christian, okay? Which is actually what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians, which we're going to talk about when he says, hey, you shouldn't sue. Isn't there anyone wise among you who could handle this dispute? So this contact, I really believe at this point, was excited because they thought they have reached out to me because I am a wise Christian person that both ministries trust to deal with this. Okay. And that would have been awesome. That would have been biblical. I would have loved to have had that conversation. I was skeptical because anytime this kind of thing happens, it feels like I think they might be trying to silence the story, but I gave them the benefit of the doubt, offered to meet with them, was very kind, had nothing to hide. And then she said right here, she said, the NDA was not written by us. It was a template we received from another ministry when we began ours. Again, a valid response that I had already made allowances for. then here's where it turned. We will discuss this with our attorney. So here's what I felt like from that. And you guys can make your own decision. What I felt like from that, though, was we contacted them. They didn't want to give us a response on the record. I guess they thought that we wouldn't share the responses they shared with this third party. Maybe they thought the third party wouldn't share them with us and would just ask us to stop the story. I have no clue. What the third party did was say, hey, let's get you together. Let's talk about this. Let's deal with this. This is good and healthy for the church. It's good and healthy for brothers and sisters to do this. And when the story didn't stop, when I didn't immediately say, no, we're not going to do this, but instead said, hey, let's talk. I'll help in any way that I can. And I want to report as accurately as I can. When I said that, we're going to talk to our attorney. That was the same day that I sent the comment. So within hours of sending the comment, you get this backdoor interaction that felt like it was trying to silence the story. Again, just my opinion. And then wait a couple of weeks, September 30th, I send out the reminder. And again, within just a few hours, we have a cease and desist from the attorney. I honestly wonder if they thought saying we'll discuss it with our attorney was going to scare me away. And that because SAI was scared of the attorney, that maybe they didn't even have to talk to the attorney. And they didn't. So again, it makes me wonder, just filling in the gaps here, when I sent the reminder on September 30th, did they all of a sudden scramble? Whoa, that didn't scare him. Let's go get our attorney involved. Well, the attorney gets involved. I send the cease and desist letter to 2 members of my board and to our attorney. Is there anything I need to do with this? Right. And look, that's what we're doing. And what we did was we honored it as well as we could. We honored it by not contacting Ankit. And when I share about this stuff, I normally link the ministries in this and the churches in this because we're not trying to hide anything from them. I'm not linking Ankit. I'm not linking ARB because we have been told to cease contact with them. We honored that part. Okay. But that's what it felt like to me. What does it feel like to you? Because again, all we can do is guess because we can't reach out to Ankit. Does it feel like an attempt to silence the story, multiple attempts to silence the story? Or, was this a valid response? Let me know in the comments. Let me know in the chat. But that was their response. Okay. And you see that right there, that final message. We'll discuss this with our attorney. Then we get the cease and desist, which you can, in the article, read the whole cease and desist. I'm going to talk about the main elements from it here in a minute, but you can see right there the screenshot. Effective immediately. You're instructed to cease all direct contact with my client. Scripturally, especially for instance, when you look at Matthew 18, you look all throughout Scripture, you look at 1 Corinthians 6, all throughout Scripture, you see Christians having hard discussions, brothers and sisters talking to one another, bringing in other mediators. What you never see in Scripture is a cease and desist. You never see a, hey, don't talk about that thing. You never see a biblical mandate for, hey, these 2 brothers, these 2 sisters shouldn't talk about this thing because they're not on the same page. Okay. So the cease and desist idea with ministries, from my perspective as a former pastor, from my perspective as someone with multiple theology degrees, I don't see that theologically how they work in the church, because I think this actually causes us not to talk when the Bible calls us to talk. But you see it right there. You see the attorney, Chris Ann Hall from Liberty First. We're going to talk about her more in this story, but also in the next segment as well. But the cease and desist, guys, it had all kinds of just inaccuracies. Okay. It was rife with inaccuracies. I'm trying to be really nice here, but some of the stuff I'm just like, where in the world did you get this from? So I don't see any point in responding directly to the attorney because they already knew we were doing an article. I think they thought we were going to get scared out of our skin. And a lot of people do. Okay. A lot of YouTubers will get these cease and desist. And up until Daystar started sending them out last year around this time, a lot of times people would kind of kowtow to them. And then all of a sudden with Daystar sending out NDAs, YouTubers started putting them on the screen, right? And they started talking about them. It's been kind of our approach from the beginning. We hadn't got one yet, but if we get one, we are not going to let a cease and desist stop us from doing our jobs. Okay. We're going to honor anything we can to be as nice to people as possible. We're doing everything we can to follow the law. More importantly, we're doing everything we can to follow the Bible because we're all Christians interacting about theological things here. But we don't let intimidation from a cease and desist stop us. Okay. So here's some of the things that they said. Okay. One of the first things that this lawyer said, your recent message to this ministry, particularly your unwarranted threats regarding its non-disclosure agreement, are inappropriate and must stop. Now, again, you can go back, you can read the full comment request. You can read the follow-up, and you can let me know if you see any threats there. But the reality is we sent one comment, we sent one follow-up, and the reality is nothing here was meant as a threat. And as I look at it, I don't see anything that even implies a threat, okay? There was no other communication. There weren't unwarranted threats in it. The comment request was simple and straightforward. We got a document. It fits our definition. Here's some questions. Would you like to comment? Okay. We shared our policies with them. We shared our removal policies with them. Okay. Because again, this is something that I think ministries and churches struggle with sometimes. Okay. Our removal policy is not super easy and broad. A lot of ministries seem to think if they just tell us, hey, yeah, we use NDAs, but we don't anymore. They seem to think that if they just go, we don't use NDAs anymore, that we should not put them on the list and not report on them. But the problem is, I haven't had any ministry so far that told me that has let us see the NDAs they're using at the moment to corroborate it's not a silencing NDA. Okay. But beyond that, a church could tell us. What would stop a church from telling us, or a ministry from telling us, we don't use NDAs anymore, and still do it? Okay. So again, when we're dealing with a public transparency project like this, once we receive a document and we report on it, okay, it is always a factual matter of public record that a document was reported to be used by this ministry, by this church, that fits our definition of a silencing NDA. That will not change in perpetuity. That fact remains. So the only reason we have the removal policy we do want to work with churches and ministries. We don't want them to feel like we're just going after them, but something has to change on the public record. Okay. It can't just be, oh, well, we don't use these anymore. Because there is reporting on a public record, something else has to change from their perspective on the public record. And if so, we'll remove them from the list. We're totally fine with them not being removed. Okay. We're totally fine with them staying on it. We're fine with churches owning it, ministries owning it and going, yep, we use NDAs because we disagree with you, Jeff, and we think they're fine. Cool. As long as you're doing it in the public, as long as you're being transparent, you're allowing for accountability conversations. We don't care what you do. So there weren't threats. There was just information here. Okay. The article I said was going to be published regardless of the response. There was nothing stopping this article from being published because we'd already received the report. Okay. The comment wasn't inappropriate. It was, all of this was common journalistic practices, and I'm not operating on my own here. Right. So there are other people keeping me in line. There are extra hoops I had to jump through this week. It's why I missed some of the live streams that were planned for this week, because we're jumping through hoops to make sure that we had everything done the most fair and ethical way that we could. But then they give us another just super puzzling thing. To my knowledge, you've never been an employee of ARB Ministries. You've never executed an NDA with this ministry. I'm unaware of any allegation of criminal misconduct involving ARM, right? And it says nothing that would justify the tone or substance of your communication. Now, first of all, again, you all can read. You can decide for yourself. I didn't think there was a problem with the tone there. I ran it through AI because AI often tells me my tone's too aggressive and I have to back it up. Okay. For instance, I had to write a letter to my HOA in the summer. AI told me about 9 straight times too aggressive. Had to back it off. I know I can be very direct and it can come across as aggressive. So I asked AI. AI said the tone was journalistic and kind and there was no problem. Okay. Again, I have another journalist who is looking over this and editing it. No problem with the tone. You can read it and decide for yourself. This felt like tone policing from me. And honestly, I don't need tone policing from a stranger attorney. Okay. This attorney was not involved in this. So it's a matter between two brothers in the church. This is a church matter with SAI. This is something we believe is a theological matter. And now all of a sudden you get an attorney involved in it, trying to make it a legal matter. Doesn't make sense. But we basically just had to tell them, we never stated or implied that anybody affiliated with SAI had a relationship with ARB. Okay. To total candor, total honesty, I didn't know what this ministry was. I didn't know it existed. They're not that big of a deal. Until I got this report, didn't know they existed. There's nothing malicious here. I don't have a vendetta here because I didn't know they were a thing. Right. But we never said we had been employed by them. Never said we had had an NDA with them. We told them, again, surely this attorney read the comment request. We told them that we had received a submission. That was it. We received a submission. It fit our definition. Here's our questions. Would you like to comment? Okay. We never said anything about criminal misconduct. If you read our website, you read the articles, you're going to see time and time again, we have to give ridiculous disclaimers to make sure that nobody is confused. This doesn't mean that anybody's doing anything bad. It just means NDA use has been reported that fits our definition of silencing NDAs. Then it finished with, if you have any specific questions about this document that pertain to the actual relationship you hold with ARB Ministries, again, we never said we had an actual relationship, and we don't need an actual relationship to report. Okay. Could you imagine if newspapers couldn't report on politicians unless they had an actual relationship with them? Like, that's ridiculous. Okay. The press is here. The reason why we have First Amendment protections, the reason why we have freedom of the press, the reason why we have freedom of speech is because the press helps hold public figures, public leaders, public institutions accountable through transparency. That's a huge part of what we're doing here. We're just offering transparency. We don't care if you use NDAs or not. Talk to your people about it, okay? All we're asking for is transparency. So why would we need a relationship with them? But it says, if you do not have a relationship with them, I strongly suggest you seek competent legal counsel. Check. We already have that. Before making any further threats. There were no threats or engaging. This is so ridiculous. It hurts, in my opinion. Or engaging in further threats or attempts to dox my client. Okay, if you're not familiar with what doxing is essentially like, hey, I'm going to try to find personal information like your address, your phone number, compromising photos, stuff like that, compromising, and I'm going to put those documents out, those photos, that information, that address. That's what I'm going to do, right? And I'm going to expose all that to people as a way of like activism and hacktivism and all that. Okay, what you're going to notice here, we don't tell you anything that was in the NDA. And oh my goodness, I would love to tell you what I find in most of these NDAs. There's some really fascinating stuff that we find in these NDAs. But conversations with our attorneys to protect our sources, to protect everybody, to make sure that we're just doing public reporting and we're not trying to hurt anybody. All we say is they had elements of a silencing NDA or not. We don't talk about the elements. We don't ever share the documents. We're not sharing anybody. If you actually go back and look in all of this communication, I've removed the personally identifying information for the third-party source, for the attorney, for ARM representative or ARB representatives. I've removed all of that because we're actually doing the opposite. We're doing our best to make sure we don't unintentionally dox them. And having multiple people look at this because we want to honor people. Okay, we want to honor that information. So this wasn't doxing. Okay, so here was kind of my response to them in the article. Labeling this as an attempt to dox ARB is unfounded and unfair. Doxing, and here's the example that I gave. Doxing could be someone trying to put out my address on social media to intimidate me to stop this work with SAI. Kind of like this cease and desist. Felt like it might be trying to intimidate me, okay? So let's say somebody finds my address, they put it out there, and they say, go bother and harass Jeff, okay? And that's designed to stop this work. That would be doxing, okay? But again, for this report, we're not sharing a specific document. We're not even sharing the elements of the document. All we're doing is reporting the document was used, okay? So what this attorney, constitutional attorney, should know better. What she is attempting to label as doxing is more akin to someone posting on social media, not my address, but they make a post and they say, Jeff Cochran of SAI, you'll never believe it. He has an address. He lives in a home and it has an address. And we just thought you should know he lives in a home with an address. Do with that what you will. That is not doxing. And neither is this. That's a report. I live in a home. I have an address like most other human beings. This is a report. An NDA was reported to be used by us. That, by the way, your client reportedly told a third-party contact that they had done. Okay. And again, that all I can do is report on what we have been given. I would have loved for them to have had a conversation with us. They made this convoluted. So we did our best to represent them fairly, and representing them fairly, saying that hey, they're just using a template. They don't know any better. Okay. That happens. That happens. We would have loved to have had a conversation where we could have educated them We couldn't have shown them the NDA that we had received, but if they'd shown us their NDA, we could have walked right through it and flagged some things and said, hey, here's a part that could be used to hurt people, to silence people. Let me show you how. Let me explain. Okay. Those conversations are great. We would have loved to have had that. But there's so much going on here beyond the cease and desist and everything else. Think about the theological implications. That's what it talks about here, this sticky scenario. This at the footer, okay, at the footer of the cease and desist, and it's actually right under this. So let me see if I can pull up the full cease and desist because I want to show you this. At the footer, do you see what it says right under the signature? Support this legal ministry with your tax deductible donation. Legal ministry, not legal firm, not nonprofit firm, legal ministry. Okay, so they're just putting out there, we're a Christian ministry, and support this Christian ministry with your tax deductible donations. Okay, so I have never gotten a cease and desist that way. I've never had a lawyer talk to me that way. Okay, this is the first time that SAI has received legal threats from a legal ministry. I've never even heard of a legal ministry before this. So let's think about this from a theological standpoint. What is this? This is a case, and this almost sounds like a brain teaser because it's so uncommon and so weird. This is a case of a Christian ministry partnering with another Christian ministry to threaten litigation or to sue another Christian ministry. Okay, that's what that is. Yet we don't find anything in the Bible talking about lawsuits except for, or as far as the New Testament that I remember, the only thing we find talking about lawsuits is Paul going, hey, you shouldn't take each other to court as believers. And then I actually put that verse there, right? You can see this 1 Corinthians 1, 6, 1 through 7. You can read it all on your own, but this is important. This is Paul, the Apostle Paul. This is scripture. This is not me. How dare you file a lawsuit and ask a secular court to decide the matter instead of taking it to other believers? They had already tried to take it to other believers, and then when they didn't get the answer they liked with an otherwise believer, then they went to a lawyer trying to take it to court. So what this looks like to me is they tried to do it the theological way, saw it as a church issue, and then did they change their mind? That's what it appears to be. But again, theologically, you got a Mike Winger video here. I just took a screen grab of. And if you don't support Mike Winger's work, I think Mike does a great job of breaking down scripture. But he hit a whole thing on can Christians sue one another. This is a very, very sticky subject. And I think most Christians are going to land with what Paul was saying is we shouldn't sue each other. We should be very careful before we sue each other. Like Paul is saying, hey, go find somebody else wise, talk about it together. Okay. We never see scripture explaining in the New Testament that conflict between members of the church, conflict between people in the body of Christ, immediately just going to a court or getting lawyers involved. That's not what we see. But this isn't just about a ministry partnering with a ministry to threaten another ministry. This is also, think about the fact that donor dollars are involved in threatened litigation between ministries, okay? It is a donor-funded, again, another brain teaser, a donor-funded Christian nonprofit enlisting another donor-funded Christian nonprofit. So ARB is enlisting Liberty First Legal, which is the legal firm that they're using, which is that nonprofit ministry, to threaten legal action against yet another donor-funded nonprofit in SAI. And I want to be honest with our donors. So we literally say here in a minute, it is our stance that we are not pursuing litigation against anybody. And the only time that we're ever getting involved in litigation that we can foresee is we're only going to engage in that if someone tries to sue us first. Someone tries to start litigation first. We will answer. We will defend ourselves, right? Because you've got to do that. We don't want litigation. It is not from our stance. And we're not saying this should be every Christian stance. We know some people see this differently, but our conviction is it's not helpful. It's not biblical. And we're just simply not going to do it. Okay. But also, when our donors see our legal fees, I want them to know that all of our legal fees are spent on stuff like this. We have to pay legal fees to try to make sure that we're doing everything possible so that other churches and ministries with a lot more money than us don't just sick lawyers after us. Because you see it right here. Let's pay. Let's get this letter written. Okay. Ankit Rambabu Ministries. How much money are they bringing in a year? In 2022, it was 1.38 million. My guess is it's probably over 2 million today. It's never been under 1 million that I can find documented. Here we are over at SAI. We're bringing in less than $35,000 for the year, and the year's almost over. So do you see why people don't report on this? Do you see why people get intimidated? Do you see why individuals get intimidated when they're trying not to sign NDAs? Because you have these big corporations called ministries with millions of dollars. And if they don't like what you do, they can just enlist lawyers and sick them on you and think, oh, well, you can't afford to deal with this. Okay. Now, we've got great donors, but when our donors actually see what we're using, I want them to see that we're only paying for legal expenses that we need to. And I want them to understand that if churches and ministries were less sue happy, if churches and ministries would have more brotherly conversations with us from a theological aspect, that this wouldn't be necessary. Okay. I wonder if their donors know. Liberty First Legal, especially Ankit Rambabu Ministries. Do their donors know when they are sacrificially giving that some of this money is being used to take legal action against another ministry that could silence this journalistic ministry from reporting a factual report, a fair report? We ask them to give us comment. We have shared everything they gave us, even though they didn't give it in any of us directly from ARB. We've shared it all. We're trying to be fair. Okay. So this, again, I just said it raises questions to me. Do donors know this? If you're donating to one of these ministries, how would you feel to know that your donation, oh man, I gave $200. I'm stretching at the end of the year to give to this ministry because I believe in it. How would you feel if you found out it was used to threaten litigation or sue another ministry? Is that what you want your donor dollars spent on? And again, I don't know how they work their legal stuff, but that is very concerning to me. And just from a theological perspective, again, we don't see lawsuits or the threat of such to be consistent with our interpretation of the Apostle Paul's words. You see where you can give online, and I just wonder if the people who are hitting that button for ARB, if they know that's how these funds are being used. But let's talk about this lawyer for a second. And again, we're going to talk more about just kind of her and her connections here in the second segment, because I think it's interesting and it illustrates a little bit of just how the evangelical industrial complex works, because we're dealing with corporations here. But Liberty First, you can actually go to their website from the article. It's pretty simple there. But Liberty First is a nonprofit. They're a public charity out of Tampa, Florida. You see right there their chief counsel, Chris Ann Hall. On the website, it says that Chris Ann Hall is an accomplished constitutional attorney and scholar with a zeal for defending liberty. She appears on podcasts. She appears on news channels. She does all this. But this is a constitutional attorney. Think about this. With a zeal for defending liberty, yet she's sending a cease and desist letter that would seem on the surface to be trying to bury a news story, to stop us reporting. That's how I took it. Just personal opinion, okay? The facts are they sent us a cease and desist letter. We honored it in the best way that we could, okay? But my opinion is it felt like it was trying to silence this story, trying to silence our constitutional right of freedom of speech, our constitutional right of freedom of press, to report on a story, to seek comment, to try to be fair and journalistic. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm just, man, I look here at Chris Ann Hall and I'm trying to figure out, what is she thinking? You know, what in the world are you thinking? But then a couple of other important things. Again, this may matter to you. This may not. I thought it was relevant. You see right there, she's got connections to Kenneth Copeland. She's got connections to Kenneth Copeland Ministries, and she's a regular guest on the Victory Channel. You see that right there, which is a part of the Kenneth Copeland network. Okay. Kenneth Copeland's a big part of the evangelical industrial complex, another ministry with a lot of money, another ministry that if you've watched The Religion Business, they done some questionable things to try to silence people from reporting on matters of public transparency. Also, Kenneth Copeland, regardless of what you believe about him, he's another guy in this healing kind of ministry, televangelist kind of ministry. He's come under fire for years. Come under fire, has faced a lot of controversy. So when I look up this attorney, and one of the first things I see when I look up this attorney on their Instagram at the time is that they're, hugged up next to Kenneth Copeland. I was like, oh, gosh, wow, man, the evangelical industrial complex feels like it just came to roost right here in our laps for this story. LFL on their website, they say here's what they exist for: to provide free legal assistance to those who find the practice of the religious faith or civil liberties being threatened by governmental regulation, intrusion, or prohibition from one form or another. Okay, that's all fantastic. What does any of the reason why they just said they exist, what does any of that have to do with SAI reporting on the story? This is not governmental intrusion. It's not, we're not the government. We're not trying to take their rights. We're exercising ours. Okay. When you go to GuideStar, and I don't know if you know this, but you can check out every nonprofit on GuideStar. Actually, if you go to see us on GuideStar, we fill out our 990s, but our 990s haven't populated yet. But we put all of our stuff there. We get the highest transparency rating possible. I don't even see a transparency rating because I don't think they have a badge yet on this, but you can look up any of the information that's available on nonprofits. When you look at their programs right here, you find that they're doing stuff like podcasts and documentaries and webinars about the Constitution. Fantastic. Has nothing to do with us. When they talk about churches, they talk about defending a Massachusetts church from government taking. We're not the government. We're not trying to take a church. So has nothing to do with us. Okay. They also talk about publishing legal pamphlets for ministries. And they talk about helping, assisting in the incorporation of ministries and creating bylaws for ministries. So I just ask you, what does any of that have to do with us? You got this nonprofit that is taking donations, a 501c3. They say, here are our programs, here's what we exist to do. Yet this cease and desist letter falls into none of those categories, which again makes me wonder, why are you partnering with this ministry to do this when this is not any part of your stated, your stated programs, your stated mission, your stated vision, right? But we also asked the question in the article, how common are cease and desist letters? This is hard to answer, okay? One thing that I'll say, okay, so let's just start here. We've reached out to 17 churches at this point, 17 churches or ministries for the NDA disclosure database. Some of the biggest churches in the world, again, like Seacoast and Life Church, Life.Church. No other ministry has responded this way. The majority have simply given us no comment at all. A few have engaged in productive dialogue. We agree to disagree. They're using NDAs and think they're fine. And we're saying, hey, there's silencing elements here. They could be used in a bad way, but we're reporting it. You're going to see it. Okay. None of them sent us a cease and desist. No other ministry sent us a cease and desist. No other ministry tried to go through a backdoor third-party conversation instead of talking to us. No other ministry did this whatsoever. Okay, we haven't heard from any of them in that regard. So from our perspective with this project, cease and desist have not been common. 1 out of 17 is not common. Okay, I will say though, I have heard of this practice being used a lot. So what I would say is this. I think this practice is quite common. It's more common than people think, but most churches and most ministries are probably not using cease and desist and threats of litigation. Okay. So I think most churches aren't doing this. So this isn't like the majority, but I think it is a common practice that a lot of ministries go to. I think it's more than, 5-10%, right? I think it's more common than we would realize. But also you see right here a picture of the annual recap that you can find on Liberty First website. They've got a whole report there. You can see the whole report. And I want to show you something on this report from 2023. Okay. Just tell me, do you think this is connected at all? I can't tell you if it's connected. In the article, we said we don't know if there's a connection, but this seems like important information. In October of 2023, okay, 2 years ago, we were contacted by an evangelist. Maybe it's Ankit, maybe it's not, but it's an evangelist, and Ankit's an evangelist. We were contacted by an evangelist who was facing defamatory remarks from an individual towards their personal character and ministry, okay? I bet they think what we're doing is defamatory, but defamation is saying untrue, false things, maliciously, with malicious intent to try to hurt a public figure or a ministry like this. We don't want to hurt them. We told you about the good things that they're doing. There's no malicious intent, and we got receipts on all this stuff. This isn't defamation. So maybe they would think we're defaming. I don't know. But this person they thought was defaming. So they took this evangelist. They stopped the defaming remarks. With swift action, we were able to ensure that the accusation ceased. Sounds like a cease and desist letter. Allowing the evangelist to freely host services where hundreds of people receive salvation, healing, and are changed forever. I will tell them after receiving a cease and desist letter from an evangelist in a situation that sounds like being on the other side of this, sounds very similar. Regardless of our report, Ankit is free. He's free to do all of his ministry. Nothing needs to change. He might have some donors. He might have some people at churches. Ask him about the NDAs. There might be some people who go, hey, we don't believe in NDAs. We're not going. There's probably going to be plenty of people who go, doesn't matter. There's going to be plenty of people who never even read the article. Okay. Nothing is stopping him from doing this. And I don't think a person defaming him in most cases would probably stop him from doing ministry. Paul got defamed all the time. Okay. So if it was legitimate defamation and they wanted to take a lawsuit, that's within their legal right. Biblically, it's sticky. But does this sound similar to you? Because what it looked like to me is, I would say this. I don't know if that was Ankit Rambabu Ministries. I don't know if that's the same client. But the fact that Liberty First Legal is talking about it as a ministry, this is something we helped another evangelist do, and now they're sending a cease and desist letter to us for an evangelist. It makes me think it's a common practice potentially in this circle. These types of ministries, maybe evangelistic ministries, it definitely looks to be a common practice from my small snapshot. Again, I've only seen 2 snapshots here, but my small snapshot, it seems to be a common practice with Chris Ann Hall and Liberty First Legal. I have questions about that, but she's a Christian attorney. She calls this a legal ministry. So a Christian attorney running a legal Christian ministry, helping another Christian ministry to try to sue another Christian ministry. I'm not sure. I would love to hear. And again, I'm not talking to her because after the cease and desist and all that, I have no reason to talk to somebody who's just going to send aggressive letters like that. If you want to talk to me, come talk to me. But I would really wonder, if it wasn't for the cease and desist letters, I may have even asked, like, how do you square this with 1 Corinthians 6, 1-7? How do you square this with the Bible? And that's a struggle that I've had with churches. Again, we tell churches and ministries, we make allowances for them using non-silencing NDAs. If they use silencing NDAs, they're free to do that, but we're going to report on that because we think it's a matter of public transparency. It's of public importance, okay? But if they want to use it, that's fine. At the same time, though, personally, just my personal opinion, when I'm talking to churches and pastors, I always just kind of ask, like, hey, how do you square it biblically? If you're using an NDA and it's silencing, and if I could show you that it could hurt someone, how do you square that biblically? I'm still waiting on a good answer. I haven't got one yet, but hopefully I'll get one. And then we finished the article with some lingering questions, and I want to finish it here because these are hard questions, and these are questions I probably wouldn't have thought as deeply about and wouldn't have asked, but because of their shenanigans, that's what I'm calling them. That's what they are to me, because they're shenanigans with the cease and desist, because they're shenanigans to go to a third party and to do all these things that felt like it was trying to stop this article. Man, it made me ask more questions than normal. And again, if they had just left this alone, given a comment or no comment, this originally, I remember kind of looking at it thinking, there's not a lot here. It's kind of a boring story. This ministry is reported to use NDAs. They didn't say anything. There it is. Public transparency. It's kind of done, right? Reminds me of the River Church that we did last week. It was kind of just a boring story. It's important that people know, but there's from just a journalistic perspective, there's nothing spicy about the story, but their behavior led me to some questions. So here's some questions I was left with. Okay. In researching for this article, I listened to a lot of videos on the website from Ankit. Okay. And I've linked those videos so that you can hear them yourself. But he says this in one of them. He says, people ask me, what's your message? What's your mandate for America? Okay. My mandate for America is very simple. Let's stop right there. Again, I'm not talking about Ankit's character or anything like that. I don't know Ankit, but that's a weird way to talk. Maybe it's because English isn't his first language. I don't know. But an individual pastor or evangelist, I don't know how you have a mandate for America. Jesus is king. He can mandate something for me. Politicians with legal authority could mandate something for me. Ankit Rambabu is just a brother in Christ. How do you get to mandate something for a whole nation? That feels weird. But he says, here's the mandate. Here's his message. It's to carry the fire of God and to create a hunger in the hearts of people for the things of God, to lead people to encounter the things of heaven. So think about the things of heaven, the things of God. And that's what I strongly believe our ministry mandate is. Okay. Which again, I think is awesome. Way to go. That's a really cool message. Calling it a mandate's weird, but that's a message I can get behind. I can agree with. But here was my question. Doesn't the fire of God light the way for truth and honesty? Isn't honesty and transparency and truth, aren't those things of heaven? Aren't those things of God? So I love what you said. Your actions, though, right? Your actions through this whole story, I struggle with it. I struggle to feel, how do NDAs that could potentially limit a person in the body of Christ, their ability to speak honestly, how does that fit into this pursuit of the things of God and the things of heaven? Again, I don't know the answer. It's just a question that I've got. What do you think? He also says this in that same video, and he's like, man, this is like emotional. He's yelling it. It's like motivation. Have you seen a man on fire? A man on fire is not worried about the opinions of others. All I know, or all he knows, is I'm a man on fire, and everybody comes into contact with me will be set ablaze by that very fire. Again, sounded really good. Okay. But if a man on fire is not worried about the opinions of others, then why are you sending me aggressive and inflamed cease and desist letters? If you don't care about my opinion, I mean, and again, the article wasn't even really my opinion. It was, for the most part, factual. This video is my opinions. If you don't care about my opinions, why do you care if I'm sharing them? Okay. As a man on fire, I would encourage you, it's probably a healthier place to not care about my opinions. Okay. Care about if there's a reproach, care about if there's valid biblical concern, care about protecting people, care about being above reproach, all that sort of stuff. You don't have to care about my opinions. All right. But also this, if he believes, if Ankit believes that NDA use, okay, is a God-honoring practice for a man on fire, then why would they respond the way they did to my questions as another brother in Christ? Like, why not just be like, hey, here's why I think it's a God-honoring practice. Why don't you just stand behind it? It was a little weird for me. So it's a question that I've got. And then this, I don't mean this to sound petty, but I put this in the article because I thought it was important. I didn't have a lot of contact with Ankit or ARB. I contacted them essentially twice and got a cease and desist letter. But he said all people are going to know when they come in contact with me, they're just going to feel that fire, that I love God, that I do all that thing. I didn't feel any of the fire he talked about. All I felt was what felt like threats. Okay. And as a Christian with the Holy Spirit inside of me, the Holy Spirit inside of me did not recognize that fruit. That's all I will say from a purely theological perspective. The Holy Spirit inside of me did not recognize the fruit of the Spirit in those interactions, let alone a man on fire. Okay. And he finishes this is wild. And then we'll kind of finish out here. He says, for like one of the lines in these videos, I say to God, and just like declaring it loud, you know, man, preaching voice, really going, I will not look like the world. I won't sound like the world. I won't act like the world. I'm not going to look, sound, or act like the world. God, I want to carry your fire. And he says, not I'm saying to you, I say to God, I won't look like the world, sound like the world, act like the world. Okay. Well, I struggle with that, Ankit, because NDAs were originally a business tool. It was a business tool mainly used in the tech industry in the 1980s to protect proprietary information. So when churches started using NDAs, it feels like pretty common knowledge here if you research it, that NDAs weren't built in the church. They were borrowed from the world, from the business world. So if you're declaring to God, which it's, again, is always so dangerous when people are publicly declaring things to God. You declare something to me and you don't go through on it, that's one thing. You declare it to God, you're making all these promises to God. Sounds like Peter, I promise I won't deny you. And he denies him 3 times. That makes it worse. But Ankit, if you're saying to God, I'm not going to look like the world, sound like the world, smell like the world, act like the world, but we're going to use NDAs, a tool from the business world, because another ministry gave it to us. And we're just, right. To me, that doesn't seem, I struggle. My question is, how does that actually fit together? How does that live out your promise? Or is it possible that the promise that you made to God on that video is is it possible that she didn't live it out through this? That's a personal conviction. It's something you're gonna have to ask the Holy Spirit about, Ankit, but it leaves me with concern and questions as a brother in Christ. But that was everything that we covered in the article, guys. But I still can't get over the use of a cease and desist letter the way that they did, going to a third party. What do you think? I really want to hear from you. Maybe I'm off my rocker here, but again, my personal opinion, this felt the whole way like a ministry that I didn't know much about, a ministry I had no malicious intent toward. What seemed like just a really simple article. Hopefully, we get some comment. Maybe we get to have a conversation with them about NDA use that is positive to the kingdom. That story, it got set on fire, but I don't think it was a holy fire. It felt like it got set on fire because I felt like at every turn they were trying to silence the story. And as a journalist committed to sharing these articles, being transparent, holding churches and ministries accountable, being fair, right? That didn't stop me at all. That actually made me want to look closer. Okay. And I would just hope that other ministries would look at this. A lot of people fold when they get these. This is not a threat to anybody. I'm just going to be honest with you guys, though. And again, this isn't a threat to any ministry. But if a ministry is sending us a cease and desist, we're not going to hide that from y'all, right? Unless there's like a specific legal reason where we have to, we're not going to hide that from y'all. We're going to tell you because, again, that's part of the response of just like we think parishioners and church members and donors should know if churches and ministries are using NDAs. We think you should know if they're using cease and desist. There's not a database for that, but if you send us one, we're not going to hide that in darkness because scripture says everything that's done in darkness is going to come to light. Okay. We're supposed to be the light of the world. We're going to shine light on that because we follow Jesus. Jesus is our judge. The law of God is our first law. Okay. So if we get a cease and desist, we're going to do that. If a church or a ministry goes beyond the cease and desist and they decide we've got more money than you, we're just going to try to sue you into silence or sue you until you don't have any more money or anything like that, we're going to let you know. We're not going to hide that because, again, we need to be above reproach. So if there's a reproach that sticks, you need to know that. Beyond that, we are going to let you know because we think it's publicly important. If a church is suing other ministries and other believers, we think that's important according to 1 Corinthians. So, of course, we're going to share that. But also, if that happens, we'd share it with you because, man, we're donor funded. We would need your help to fight those legal fees. Hopefully that doesn't happen, though, because there's no reason for it, right? But I don't know what these ministries are thinking. And I'm not just talking about ARB here. But when ministries send cease and desist letters, I'm not sure how they think that's above reproach scripturally. And I'm not sure why they think that another ministry of Christians would not biblically just go, hey, did you know they're doing this? Why are they doing this? This doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel biblical to me. So I'm not sure why they wouldn't think you would do that. But just like an NDA, I've never found a ministry that wanted to use NDAs when they were public knowledge. Most of them, the power of the NDA feels like, and maybe I have with a couple of ministries, but it's rare. Usually the power is if it's in secret, we can silence people and nobody knows. When it's not done in secret, which is why we like public transparency, kind of loses the power and the appeal a little bit. Same thing with cease and desist letters, and the same thing with lawsuits. Like when a ministry or a church files a lawsuit against other Christians, I think it's unbiblical, but I think it's a bad look. So I'm not sure what some of these churches and ministries are thinking, but for you as a parishioner, as a donor, as a supporter and volunteer at different nonprofits and churches, what do you think after you hear all of this, right? This just left me with so many questions, guys. That's, I guess, why I'm having a hard time figuring out even how to end this piece because what started out with a simple, hey, here's a ministry that is reported to use NDAs. Here's what they said. You make up your own mind. What started out as public transparency, I feel like I'm left with so many questions. And honestly, just as a fellow Christian, my stomach is in knots over this one. And I hope that this is not the norm. I hope that this is not the norm that we experience, but I will make this commitment to you. As long as we're an organization, SAI is going to actually fight for the transparency and accountability that we say is our mission. honor scripture. We're going to honor that. We're going to honor you. We're not going to back down just because somebody sends us a scary letter. So again, it's not a threat, but if you're a ministry or you're a lawyer out there, we just need you to know this is a matter of fact. That's not probably the best way to respond. We're not going to change anything. But if that's how you choose to respond, feel free. But I would love to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below. Let me know in the chat. Um, and we're going to look here in the next segment. We're going to look a little closer at one of the players in this whole story, because I think there's some really important things that we can learn. But that's it. Brand new ministry added to the NDA disclosure database. Lots of salvations reported, lots of healings reported, lots of really good stuff going on. Obviously, they're thought really well and high of, a lot of donors. But I would really encourage them to ask some questions and really pray through that use of NDAs. And then they've got to come to the decision that they will. But that's it for this one. We'll be back with another one soon. But until then, grace and peace. And I can't wait to see your thoughts below. All right. So let's just go ahead. Let's get in the chat for a minute, and then I'll get into these other two segments because they'll be different. We'll probably be a little more salty in this next segment because I can, but it's more of just, we're going to trace the evangelical industrial complex, and as gross as it is, it's just, you're going to see the collision. This is part of the struggle here. Biblical Christianity is colliding with the corporation of the church and the world. And that is a problem. And when you bring like the whole legal stuff into it, you're bringing the world right into the middle of it. And sometimes, man, like you're just going to see the evangelical industrial complex. You got churches that, without even realizing it, start just stepping into like this corporate world, doing just kind of some wild stuff. But we'll get there here in just a second. Now, I would love to know, Abby, was that piping hot tea? What do you think about that one? Because I told you this was going to be a big one. Anyway, but hopefully that was helpful for you and you enjoyed it. I'm going ahead and trying to find the comments from that one. Still had some conversations about deconstruction, which I don't want to jump back into today. But Chrissy says transparency and not cover up is the key. Chrissy, I 100% agree, which is, again, it's just why we shared everything. And those are my opinions. Maybe I'm totally off. I do think it's important for Ankit Rambabu and Jess and this attorney to just understand as Christians how this can come across. But again, maybe they didn't mean anything by it. We're not going to hide anything. Hopefully they're not going to hide anything. And the more transparent we are just as ministries and churches, I think the better off we are. Natasha says, personally, I believe there's a healthy deconstruction and an unhealthy one. Healthy being deconstructing from false or twisted beliefs that you've been taught or told were right, and reconstructing your faith based on what the Bible says. And again, not trying to get in the deconstruction thing, but I read that comment before I even realized what it was. Healthy, what most Christians would call a healthy deconstruction, which leads you to a stronger faith. Reconstruction requires deconstruction. So when a person deconstructs, they're deciding based on, hey, I'm pursuing truth. That's what it should be, based on that pursuit of truth, where I'm going. That's why we as the church, we got to be willing to walk with people and do this, because I agree. I think that's the best way, is to reconstruct. But a lot of times when people are in that process, they don't know what the outcome is, because there comes a point when you deconstruct where you say, I'm following truth. I'm pursuing truth. Jesus said he's truth. So I'm assuming he can handle this. I'm going to see this. That pursuit of truth has got to lead you somewhere. And that pursuit of truth with other Christian believers who will walk through those big questions with you, I think it's actually super helpful. So anyway, Abby says, Ankit Rambabu is her age, 30. He's a young dude. That's a lot of influence, but it's also, when I was 30, I'm not sure that I realized the implications of NDAs. I didn't realize the implications of NDAs until I was asked to sign one, until I started hearing stories every day of people whose lives have been turned upside down by them. Okay. Some of y'all are just going back and forth on age, which I appreciate. Linda appreciates Natasha's good description of deconstruction and reconstruction. I do as well. Linda, when they count salvations, are they counting one person who got saved 20 times? That I can't answer. I'm not sure how Armenian their theology is. They are in the more charismatic persuasion. They don't give any basis for those numbers. They just put those numbers out there. And I wanted to share them with you guys because regardless of how many it is, it does sound like they're doing good things. I want them to keep sharing the gospel. Anybody sharing the gospel, as long as it's the true gospel, that is a good thing. Life on Hoth is in the chat. Thanks for watching today. Appreciate you being here. He says high profile is not important versus others. Why are they keeping hundreds of thousands of phone numbers? It's probably to invite people to crusades, invite people to donate. We're about to hit the end of the year. We'll be doing a campaign because at the end of the year, if you guys didn't know, for a lot of nonprofits, 25% of all the giving comes in the last month of the year. Some of that's because of taxes. Some of that is just because people are thinking about generosity in the holiday season. So like, yeah, we'll probably be doing that, but I bet they use those numbers and those emails to do that. We usually just put stuff on social media and talk about it, talk about it like, on YouTube and stuff like that. We don't send emails out generally asking people to give, but I would say that's probably what they're doing. It is a very good question. I agree with Abby there. If at some point you delete the data when it's not needed anymore, nobody needs that kind of database. It is a big database, but I bet for them, they're thinking these are always people we can invite to a crusade because they've come to one before, or we can invite them to give because they've shown interest. Corporations tend to get rid of data a lot better than Christians do. Christians and churches tend to hoard data a little bit more, but also, churches can get into some gray areas with email and stuff like that, because while they are a corporation, they're not always following the rules that everybody else is following. So I definitely see where you're coming from, and I'm for privacy too, man. I think it's good that they're trying to bring the privacy, but the privacy issues in the NDA, those privacy concerns were not the only thing that we saw in the document that we reviewed. Natasha says the mention of high profile influencers seems like a combo threat and puffing themselves up. Maybe that's just me. Honestly, I didn't take it that way, but I can see where you're coming from there. We don't care how big a church is. It's not going to change our reporting. It's not going to change our ministry. We don't care how well known they are, how much of a celebrity they are. So if that was what they were trying to do, which again is not how I took it, but if it was, sometimes I laugh, Natasha, because if some of these individuals and some of these ministries would just do like a small amount of research on me or on our board or on SAI, they would realize that they're probably not taking the right approach with us on stuff like that. Because that, even if that's what they meant, which I have no clue, that would have went right over my head, because I don't care. I'm not intimidated by other people. What's the worst thing that can happen? What's the worst thing that can happen? Somebody with a lot of authority, cancels us, or somebody, gets a lawsuit and, somehow they're able to sue us into oblivion. Like, none of that actually, it can make it harder to do the mission, but none of that's life-changing. None of that's why would we stop when there are Christians going through real persecution, like dying for sharing their faith and for doing their ministry? Why would we be worried about cancellation or lawsuits or anything like that? Like, we want to be above reproach. We want to follow the law. We want to do all that, but it doesn't really affect us. So Natasha says that paired with the refusal to have a direct conversation and the cease and desist were red flags. I agree. I think they were all red flags. The mention of celebrities was probably a red flag for a little different of a reason for me. But for me, it was just like, man, what's the point of even saying that? Because it doesn't change. They're being a celebrity or influential doesn't change anything. Life on Hoth says maybe it's puffing up. Maybe it's just leaning on something that can try to make their point valid, that doesn't cost them much to say, like not defending their practice, but leaning on third-party authority. It felt like, again, just my opinion, but it felt like to me they were taking the easy way out in a lot of this stuff. When the best way, that I don't think would have been that difficult, would have just been like, hey, here's a comment, or even no comment. It was just kind of weird. When the cease and desist are sent, that sometimes means the senders are the ones who should be receiving it. I agree. I'm not going to say what I think in this particular situation, but I agree with that. Chrissy says that's the whole point of cease and desist. They're just trying to scare people. It's intimidation. I will say, from the conversations that I've had with attorneys, other people who have been through this, other influencers, other journalists, all of that. It does sound like more often than not, the cease and desist are just it's a cheap piece of paper to try to silence someone. So a lot of times they're not going to come forward. But again, I mean, if someone tries to sue us, we got receipts on all this stuff. We try to report fair and neutral. So I mean, I'm not sure. There's a lot of different things they could try to sue us on. The easiest thing would be defamation, but we have receipts that we don't share even with y'all for these reasons. We try to make sure that we're sticking to facts as much as possible, and we go above and beyond to try to not be malicious. Like again, one of my journalistic contacts actually said the other day, "I think you're too nice in your journalism," and I said, "Well, we're a ministry. We're trying to be above reproach. We're trying to make sure that we're above reproach lawfully and everything else." And I'm like, "Oh, I totally get it, but normal journalists are not as nice as you. Like you could be a lot edgier with this stuff." But again, we want to be above reproach. So Chrissy says many of them not only use NDAs but non-compete clauses. That is very true. We've seen a lot of non-compete clauses. We don't delineate non-compete clauses in this, but if there's a non-compete clause, that would be part of a silencing NDA to me. But pastors leave and have to find other careers, at least temporarily. It's another level of silencing, and it destroys people's lives. I know we didn't get a non-compete, but at the same time, I didn't want to move my kids right before middle school and high school. So you got to think about it. I'd spent all this money on degrees, spent 15 years of my life in a profession, and then all of a sudden, overnight, I lost my profession to try to honor my first ministry to my kids. Because even though I didn't have a non-compete, the church I was at had a lot of influence. There probably wasn't going to be anywhere I could go in Knoxville or around my city. So yeah, I can speak. It really messes with people's lives a whole lot. Natasha says intimidation in churches or ministries shouldn't be occurring. I agree with that as well. Life on Hoth, this train with people pushing back on unhealthy practices, bringing hermeneutics to the table is a new train, but it will run over those who won't stop silencing whistleblowers. Man, I don't know. After all the Mark Driscoll stuff, I'm very uncomfortable with the train analogies or anything running over, anybody. But I will say I think you're onto something there, Life on Hoth. When you bring Bible and sound hermeneutics into the conversation, a lot of the stuff, the conversation just changes. And I'm not saying this is what ARB was trying to do, but if you have a ministry that doesn't want to have the theological, hermeneutical Christian conversation about this, it's probably easier to turn it into a legal conversation or a corporate conversation. But as Christians, we're not called to have legal conversations and corporate conversations about these things. We're called to have biblical, theological, hermeneutical, Christ-like conversations about them. And again, when hermeneutics enter the chat, it messes with people. Okay. I mean, the train ain't stopping. It's coming as a shock to those people who are not used to proper and valid pushback. I 100% get that. PC Joseph says these churches literally are all about manipulation and control. Dealing with them is like dealing with the devil. Very cunning. I can, there's a lot of cunning there. I can see where you're coming from, right? What, Jeff? You live in a house? Yes, I live indoors. I try as much as possible. I prefer not to be homeless when possible. Brand new news. I know that whole idea of us doxing them, like unless you're trying to use some weird legal manipulation, which she's an attorney, so maybe she is, but I don't think practically the way that anybody's looking at doxing that can be called doxing. Non-compete clauses equal something I can't respect in any situation. Humans are free. I agree with that as well. He had an address. You make me laugh. I'm glad you guys like that one. That was honestly the best example I could use of how just ridiculous that argument was. It did not make any sort of sense to me. So this is what I feel like sometimes. Abby, I'm right there with you. Is this real life? Natasha says, I thought he just lived in the liminal space of YouTube. No, I really don't. That would be super uncomfortable. So, yeah, guys, this is weird. And I think y'all are feeling the weirdness. I thought maybe it was just me, but Life on Hoss is this spending church money the wrong way? I'm not even shocked that they use it like that. I wish I was, though. I totally feel that. There are People will tell me things all the time and they go, Jeff, this is going to shock you. And my answer almost all the time now is honestly, not a lot shocks me anymore. I wish it did. So I'm right there with you. Like it's heartbreaking that more of this stuff doesn't shock us. Sadly, sometimes the legal channels is the last resort, such as what's happening with Jeremiah Council and Second Baptist Houston. They tried resolving it within, but the young group refused to cooperate. Again, I totally get where they're coming from. We've covered that in videos, so I'm not trying to make them feel bad. I'm not labeling that as sinful. Different people have different interpretations. I don't know that as SAI, I don't know that we would ever do that. Even in that situation, I think just the reporting of it and then move on is probably enough. But I understand why they're doing it. But with this case, and that's just the funny thing, this wasn't a last resort. This was you reached out to us once for comment requests and once with a reminder, and we went kind of wild. Abby says, imagine how much good they could do in their communities if they didn't spend money on all the legal proactive stuff they're doing. Who knows, Abby? Maybe we're the only people they've done this to, but I sincerely doubt that. I sincerely doubt that. I would love to be able to pay a lawyer on our staff, but we don't have enough money to pay anybody to be on the staff. But we have some good outside general counsel that we've worked with and are working with. I've actually got a meeting next week with another law firm about some of this projects that we're doing that we think they would be able to help us with really well. So it sucks having to spend that money, but having some good attorneys in different areas of expertise on retainer is helpful, right? Life on Haas said, I would feel angry if I knew my giving money was being used to make enemies in the body of Christ. I totally agree with that, and I see exactly where you're coming from. So it looks like most of y'all feel kind of the same way that I did. We're not going to make it through all of the chat. Absolutely. Yep. The mascot did show up. He just randomly barks sometimes, but let's go ahead. I want to get into segment number 2. And I apologize if I didn't get to the stuff that you were sharing in the chat. Very active today. I love that. I want to talk more about KrisAnne Hall, though, the attorney from Liberty First, and not because I'm mad at KrisAnne Hall or anything else like that, but I want to ask some questions about some stuff that I think she illustrated in the evangelical industrial complex. And I just really want to ask the question, is there hypocrisy in the evangelical industrial complex? And if so, how is it affecting the body of Christ? Because I think there is, from my opinion, I think it's affecting us in very negative ways. And so I just want to head on, just kind of deal with some of that hypocrisy. Because again, if she was a constitutional lawyer, all of a sudden sending a cease and desist from the church, something sounded fishy about that. So I just, I looked her up. Where I am a journalist after all. Looking people up and getting information is easy. So I want to talk about that. Also, this is all public information that you can see online. So in case she accuses me of doxing, definitely not doxing. And if it is doxing, that would mean that she doxed herself, which is hilarious. But Abby says, I feel like we need to see our mascot too. He is like just short enough to like not come into the camera feed, but just like the top of him. But he's a Burma doodle. Looks like a golden doodle, just more shaggy. Titan was a little bigger. So y'all used to see him, big white dog. But this guy is just a little too short for the camera. But he may come on one day, but he's trained very well. He doesn't jump. He knows he's not supposed to jump. So usually you will hear him. But let's go ahead and let's get into this second segment, because I think there's a lot of stuff to talk about. I'm going to try not to be too salty, but again, these are my opinions and I am a little salty about this, but let's go ahead and jump in and have the conversation. Sometimes the hypocrisy of the evangelical industrial complex blows my mind, but at the end of the day, I might be seeing it wrong. So I want to talk about some of the hypocrisy that I see, things that look like hypocrisy to me out of the evangelical industrial complex, why I think they're concerning, not going to say dangerous, but concerning. And a recent example where I noticed some of this stuff, some of the questions that I have. Now, before we get into the hypocrisy of the evangelical industrial complex, I want to go ahead and make it clear. These are my opinions. They're not necessarily the opinions of SAI. They are my opinions. This is my commentary. We're going to be looking into an attorney today that actually sent us a cease and desist letter on another project that we're working on over a ministry that was going on the NDA disclosure database. So because of that, I feel like we need to be very careful. These are opinions. But I just want to look at some things that were disconcerting to me. And while I'm using this example of my interactions with this attorney and stuff that's out there with this attorney, and just trying to say, hey, how did some of these Christian things and Christian people get involved in the corporate side of the evangelical industrial complex? Even though we're doing that, I don't know anything about this person. I'm sure they're a good person. I'm not saying anything bad about them or their character, but I do think it's important that we can start to look and see sometimes, ask the question, is our behavior lining up with the things we've said and the things that we say we believe? And when I talk about the evangelical industrial complex, you're going to see NDAs connecting in the evangelical industrial complex. You're going to see corporate structure and business structure colliding with the church. You're going to see legal maneuvering and the court system colliding with the church. You're going to see money colliding with the church. You're going to see influence and, all the government and everything else colliding with the church. And I think this is one of the biggest problems with the evangelical industrial complex is we have so many churches today that don't even realize how much of the world has collided with the church. And I think we got to ask these questions. But if you are not familiar, go ahead and share this first. We had an article that came out just today, as of October 30th is when we're filming this. This article came out. It's about a ministry that was reported to use NDAs. We got a cease and desist, and the cease and desist actually came from the attorney that we're going to talk about here in just a second, and that is KrisAnne Hall. KrisAnne has a lot of stuff that I agree with. There's a lot of stuff that I disagree with. I appreciate the way that she, as a constitutional attorney, takes on some of just kind of the norms of government and really challenges for limited government. So I appreciate that. She seems like a smart person, probably a really good person. But I want to talk about some things I think we can learn from the evangelical industrial complex through this, because that's how all of this started. This got started because we're doing this article, and all of a sudden, while we're doing this article, we're getting a cease and desist letter and what looks like legal threats from an attorney. And I see it's a constitutional attorney, and I'm a little weirded out by it. Why is a constitutional attorney threatening legal action, sending us a cease and desist over a journalistic article about a ministry? That doesn't seem constitutional. I actually remember the first thing I thought of was this seems constitutional, but it seems constitutional in that it is, and give me just a second to share my screen the right way. Got to switch screens. But the only way that it seemed constitutional in any way to me was that the reporting that we're doing, the work that we're doing, should be protected by the First Amendment, should be protected by the Constitution, freedom of speech and freedom of press. So I want to go ahead and I want to look at some of this stuff, because when I saw that this is actually who was sending this letter, it really threw me off. So I got this shared. Let me go ahead and find the right spot there. Okay. This is KrisAnne Hall. This is the attorney that I'm talking about. And the first thing that I noticed, okay, it was one of the very first things I noticed. It wasn't this picture, but it was another one. I'm going to show you a few. When I looked her up on Instagram, trying to figure out why she was the one that was sending this cease and desist letter, what I found was not only that she's a constitutional attorney, but she has some pretty significant connections to Kenneth Copeland. And Kenneth Copeland, if you're not familiar, he's a very controversial televangelist, healing guy. If you watch The Religion Business, and we got multiple videos with Nathan Atfel, Chris Ayub, the creators of The Religion Business, I've got videos where we did a review of the full documentary. But in one of the episodes, they're actually trying to bring some transparency and reporting in the documentary to Kenneth Copeland. And guys, they're almost they're threatened with trespassing. They're almost thrown off of the property. There is a guy who is not a police officer, looked like private security, who is flashing a badge it looks to be fake, a gun, all kinds of stuff going on. Okay. So when I hear Kenneth Copeland's name or someone with connections to Kenneth Copeland, one, I'm thinking about the controversy. Two, I'm thinking about lack of transparency. But three, I'm thinking about the evangelical industrial complex. Okay. Because this is a guy who's a part of a big evangelical ministry, lots and lots of money, really set up and operates a lot like a corporation. So when I think about the evangelical industrial complex, I think about people like Kenneth Copeland, and you see Chris Ann Hall right there with Kenneth. You see another picture, because that's not the only one. She's quite chummy with Kenneth Copeland, and she's also thanking him. Thank you, Brother Copeland, for your confidence in me and your words of encouragement. My heart is so blessed. What an amazing night. I'm so grateful to the Copeland Network and the Victory Channel. I'm so grateful to serve alongside you in this effort. Words cannot express the love and admiration I have for you. This doesn't sound like a surface connection. So when I looked at this, it's like, okay, she seems to have some pretty significant connections in relationship to Kenneth Copeland. Again, that is not the only time you see her at another event, kind of soiree right there. That's Chris Ann. That's Kenneth. You got yet another one. Chris Ann right there. You got Kenneth. So the connections to Kenneth Copeland, it made me realize, okay, this is a constitutional attorney. This is a Christian, but this is a Christian constitutional attorney who is also very connected to, it would seem, the evangelical industrial complex. And because I've seen the behavior of Copeland and others, all of a sudden the cease and desist, it made a little bit more sense. Because when I've seen people like Chris Apfel or Nathan Apfel try to get information on the religion business, and we've seen other people try to cover Kenneth Copeland, it doesn't seem like that ministry is a very big fan of transparency. They don't offer a lot of transparency with how their money is spent. But not only is there a relationship with Kenneth Copeland there, I think it was important to know, I saw very quickly that Chris Ann is a regular kind of contributor or a person who does regular appearances on Victory News, which is a part of the Victory Channel and a part of the Copeland Network. Okay, so you see right here, Victory News, join Chris Ann live. If you actually look at her Instagram, you're going to see she's on there all the time. So there's a significant connection to what I would call the evangelical industrial complex. Also, I just wanted to look at this because this is something that's going to come up a good bit as I looked into Chris Ann, something that's surprising. It's something that feels, again, like a bit of the hypocrisy that we tend to see in the evangelical industrial complex. She said, would you like some news with solutions instead of propaganda? You're going to see in other places where she talks about news not being news and so much news being curated, not telling us the truth. So it was odd to see her as an advocate for real news with solutions and real reporting and transparent reporting. That's what it felt like she was for. Yet all of a sudden, as journalists working on an article about a factual report, it felt like when we got the cease and desist letter from her, it felt like we were trying to be shut down. So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance here because I see a Christian attorney who's connected to the big evangelical industrial complex, but also Christian ministries, constitutional attorney, but she's getting involved with this in a way that her actions felt like they were literally trying to silence something she prized, which is, again, I think we're news with solutions. And I don't think what we do is propaganda. I think we show our work and we try to be very neutral. Sometimes people even get mad because they say, Jeff, you should have went harder on this. You should have talked more about this. You should have said that. And the reality is in our reporting, we're trying to be as neutral and honoring and honest as possible. You see her right there with the whole Victory News team. So she's not just, calling in. She's been a part of those events. It was an absolute pleasure and honor to be in studio today with the Victory News crew, which again is a part of the Copeland Network. You see her on the Copeland Network right there with Victory News. Okay. You see her, she's getting interviewed. But then you see, again, this was just my mind was spinning trying to figure out how all this worked, because you got this Christian constitutional attorney who is pro-transparent news. And now all of a sudden she's saying facts, not emotion, first graders and free speech. And it's a whole segment on even first graders understanding free speech. It's a segment on free speech. Yet when I got that cease and desist letter from her, and maybe you wouldn't have taken it this way, but I did, I felt like it was limiting our free speech as journalists. You see her again appearing on the Copeland Network, and she's talking about Chuck Schumer. Okay, regardless of what you feel about Chuck Schumer, listen to this. Is it irony or hypocrisy? You be the judge. And that's exactly, I'm going to use Chris Ann's own words in this video today. Is her behavior irony, hypocrisy, or something else? You be the judge. And I'm trying to be really nice because I don't want to feel like I'm coming against Chris Ann's character or anything like that. I'm asking questions. I'm pointing out inconsistencies. I'm sharing my opinion because, again, when you get a cease and desist letter from another Christian, that's always a concern, especially when it's from an attorney that specializes in something like constitutional law. But I just want to use her own language. And something you're going to notice in this, guys, again, Chris Ann is, I'm sure she's probably a really nice person. She uses some really edgy, hard language. She does not shy away from calling people names. I will let some of her own harsh language be used at times, but we try to not just call people names and do stuff like that. So I'm going to try to take the high road, but you're going to see some pretty heavy stuff like this. So it should be okay for us to have this conversation because just like this is media commentary, she's seems like all the time, very consistently offering media commentary where she's pretty hard on people, right? So I definitely think she'll understand where we're coming from. Some other things that I found, we're just going to go through a lot of this stuff, and I want you to ask the question, do you see any hypocrisy? And if you see hypocrisy, again, this isn't just about her. Do you see where the evangelical industrial complex is intersecting with her Christian faith? Do you see where the evangelical industrial complex is intersecting with her career as a constitutional lawyer? Do you see where the evangelical industrial complex is colliding with this ministry that she sent a cease and desist on their behalf? Do you see where the evangelical industrial complex is colliding with us? All throughout this, I think you're going to see the evangelical industrial complex colliding all around. And when you ask what the evangelical industrial complex is, the best way that I would describe it is it's when the church is colliding with all various parts of corporation in the world. Okay, so legal, corporate, worldly stuff, all of that, all of a sudden the lines are being blurred between the things of this world and the things of the church. Okay, that's just something that exists. I think it's concerning. Doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong or sinful or anything else. It's concerning to me because the evangelical industrial complex does not feel like what we're called to be biblically as a church. But that is going to have to be for you to decide. But Chris Ann says right here, wow, thanks, Grok. This feels like, when people Google themselves, this almost feels like the new version of Googling yourself. Let me just see what AI says about me and then post it. It was a little weird for me, but she says, thanks, Grok. And Grok says Chris Ann Hall is a former biochemist turned constitutional attorney. So she's a super smart person. Passionately exposes government overreach like Congress's shady Zelensky meetings while championing liberty and American self-reliance with a fiery, no-nonsense flair. I think I got it right. She does have a fiery, no-nonsense flair. But it was a little weird to watch this. Again, do you see any potential hypocrisy here or what feels like that? She passionately exposes government overreach by day, yet sends a cease and desist letter to us doing a journalistic article about reported NDA use by a ministry. I would normally think, and this caused cognitive dissonance for me personally, because I would normally think someone who fights against government overreach, because again, I'm a big proponent of standing against government overreach. Okay, not to make this political, but I'm a big proponent of limited government. There's a lot of places where Chris Ann and I would agree. There's a lot of places we would disagree, but there's some common ground there. Normally, when you find someone who's passionately exposing government overreach, they're not also going to be sending cease and desist letters to a group like SAI that is exposing church overreach, that is exposing worldly practices in the church, that is simply, and when I say exposing, I don't even mean bad, like we're just turning the light on. There's some stuff that's happening in the dark. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it's amoral, neutral. We're just turning the light on so the church can look at it and go, is this what we feel like the Holy Spirit's calling us to do, right? So it feels like we're running in similar lanes. I'm passionate about transparency, accountability in the church, and fighting against the misuse of power in the church, all those sorts of things. She's passionate about all the same things, yet in government. So it was, again, a little odd to me. I would love to know what you thought, but I thought it was odd to get that response from her. You're going to see her talk about a lot of political things. I don't want to get into the politics of it, but I do want to warn you, she's going to talk about those. Let's not get bogged down with those in the chat because we have people from all over the political spectrum. I want to focus just on the evangelical industrial complex piece of this, the Christian kind of ethics piece of this, and just, just kind of some of the cognitive dissonance and perhaps perceived or potential hypocrisy here. And again, we all have hypocrisy, guys. So I'm not saying Chris Ann's a bad person. I got hypocrisy on my own life. We all do. I think it's important when it's hypocrisy that is connecting the church and blending the church together with the world. I do think we got to ask questions about it, though. In this particular post, she's talking about Gateway Church and Robert Morris. Let's see if you see any potential hypocrisy here. She says this is a warning to churches. And again, I appreciate that she does legal work for churches. I appreciate that she's warning churches. What's her warning from this Gateway lawsuit? She says, this case will create problems for all churches that are 501c3s. While there are churches that aren't 501c3s, first of all, I would say most every church I know is a 501c3 because to be a nonprofit corporation, a 501c3 is normally the way that you're going to go, okay? But she says this, here's some of the problems with this. Here's how government control is likely to go, okay? Jurisdiction versus corporate status. By registering as a 501c3 corporation, the church voluntarily enters into a legal relationship with the federal government. This corporate status, you're going to see corporate pop up time and time again, provides the courts with jurisdiction to interpret and enforce promises made by the corporation and through contract law. So I just want to talk about a couple of things here because here's the things that cause me some cognitive dissonance, that cause me to be confused. I am with her. I think it's better for churches not to be corporations. I don't even know exactly how that works. She knows more than I do. But by becoming 501c3s and operating as corporations, we've gotten too much corporate into the church, in my opinion. And I don't think the church can operate properly as the church when it is meshing with the world and meshing with corporate tactics and corporate principles and all of that sort of stuff. So I would agree with her on that, okay? I agree that the church is entering into a legal contract with the government, and I think that's always concerning, okay? That's one of the reasons why it weirds me out when churches are like, well, we're not sharing financial transparency like a 990 because we don't have to. Well, no, you don't have to, but you entered into a contract with the government. Why wouldn't you follow the rules that all of other nonprofits do? Okay. But again, corporation. I want you just to note how many times she uses corporate or corporation. I think one of the biggest concerns for me with the church is that the church has blended with the corporate world. And when we do that and we start acting like corporations, we cannot act like a corporation in the church at the same time, in my opinion. Okay. So I share this concern. She talks about the corporate just kind of enmeshment. Part of that's through contract law, which is why I was totally weirded out when she was representing a church corporation as their lawyer. She's telling churches don't be a corporation. And then she is representing a ministry 501c3 corporation as their lawyer and using, we're talking about contracts and transparency of contracts with NDAs, and she's sending us a cease and desist, which is another legal document. This just felt really weird to me, okay? Again, she continues to talk about breach of trust and contract, contractual commitments, if I breach a contract. So all of that sort of stuff, she's telling churches, hey, you really want to stay away from contracts. You want to not just stay away from being a corporate entity, stay away from contracts. What she is seems to be saying in a lot of ways is that it's dangerous or concerning, problematic, whatever word you want to use, when a church is entering into contracts. Yet again, the story we were writing was about a report of NDA use, and an NDA is nothing if not a contract, from my perspective and understanding. So again, churches, don't use contracts. Be careful with contracts. And then it was hey, don't talk about this reported use of NDAs with this ministry that's a part of the church. These are Christians who are part of the Christian church. Don't talk about that because you're not privy to their contracts. They get to use their contracts. So are you against church contract use or are you for contract use? I'm very, very confused. Okay. So again, are you seeing anything that feels like or sounds like hypocrisy here? Do you see the evangelical industrial complex bleeding into this, as she's warning churches about the bleed of what I would call the evangelical industrial complex. I'm reading that while also having a cease and desist from her. And it just feels like we probably would agree on a lot of things about the church. Yet her behavior as this attorney right now, it just did not seem to match. It was weird to me, but I would love to hear from you. Let's talk about the news, because I told you she talk about news a lot, and we are part of SAI, and what we do is journalism. It's media. It's a lot of different things. This is commentary and opinion. We do a lot of factual articles and journalistic articles with the NDA database. But she says, we don't have news industries. We have propaganda contractors. They choose what we see and don't see, right? And I would agree, in a lot of cases, we don't have news. I think we do have news, but in a lot of cases, we don't. So what we're trying to do, we're not trying to give propaganda at all. We try to be very fair, give facts, let people make the decision, okay? We work really, really hard at that. So it's weird when we're working really hard to promote the news. She is for real news and not propaganda, yet she's sending us a document, a letter that feels like it's designed to silence us from reporting. Then she says they choose what you see and don't see. It felt like the cease and desist when we got it. We're reporting on a public transparency issue that a lot of churches and ministries are not going to tell their parishioners and donors when they're using contracts like NDAs, when the corporate world is meshing with the church world. We think the church needs to know that. We think the people of the church and the donors need to know that, because that's a theologically sticky issue. Some people are going to care, some people are not. So we don't care if churches use NDAs. We want churches to be transparent and ministries to be transparent if they use NDAs, okay? We don't want churches and ministries and pastors choosing what people see and they don't see. I'm with Chris Ann right there. But she says this in one breath, and in the next breath sends us a cease and desist that felt like it was choosing what people would see in the church and what people wouldn't. So again, it just feels like a double standard here. It's easy to do in the church when we're dealing with the evangelical industrial complex, because we got to be able to separate the biblical church, the scriptural church, from all the corporate pieces, the contracts, and the world. Am I crazy? Or do you see this too? Open your eyes to the world around you. You cannot believe anything they publish or the reason they publish it. We're trying to open the eyes to the world around us, and we're trying to help other people do that as well. Churches don't always operate the way we think they do or should. Ministries don't either. We want to open people's eyes that accountability and transparency is needed, because as church members, we are all responsible for the things that are happening in the body of Christ. And we don't want people to believe things we publish just because we publish them. I want people to follow the receipts. I want people to ask if we've shown our work. So we're trying to do all that, yet we get a cease and desist. The real extent of this state of information is known only to those who are in situations to confront facts with their knowledge of the lies of the day. Again, I agree. And why we do the work we do at SAI, I was a pastor for 17 years. I have been in meetings with some of the most influential people in the evangelical industrial complex. I know how these systems work. I was a church consultant for a long time, ministry consultant. I get this. So I feel like, she talks about the state of misinformation. I feel like I'm in a situation to confront the facts because of my knowledge of the lies of the day, my knowledge of the omissions of the day, my knowledge of the system of the day. So again, I'm reading her post and going, yeah, I think we would be connected on a lot of our philosophy, only to get a cease and desist. I'm not sure if she was really thinking about the cognitive dissonance this could cause or the potential hypocrisy of that message. This was the second part of the story showing you Irina Zarutska, I believe was her name, the heinous, just crazy attack. And she talked about it, 0 AP stories, 0 New York Times stories. And she's going through all this. There wasn't enough press coverage of this, and I totally agree, which is why I was really concerned when she was stopping us from, or what looked like attempting to stop us, right? With that cease and desist letter from reporting on something else that doesn't get enough reporting. We should want more accurate news reporting, news that is not beholden to big donors, that is not beholden to, all of that sort of stuff. We're a ragtag nonprofit. We don't have enough money coming in to be beholden to anybody, right? So you would think she would be more on board with what we're doing. But when her law career connects with her nonprofit corporation and another ministry corporation, then all of a sudden her way of thinking seems to shift. And all of a sudden you got Christians who are, it feels like they're now acting more corporate. Let's go through this legal thing. Let's go through all of this instead of following biblical processes for having these discussions. She says this: an avidity to punish is always dangerous to liberty. I also agree. The cease and desist felt like a threat. Okay. Most people, when they get cease and desist, most media members, that feels kind of like a threat. Stop reporting or else. Now, a lot of times they're empty threats, but that was my feel. This felt like a threat to punish. We'll pursue litigation. NDAs themselves feel like a threat to punish. If you're not silent about what we ask you to be silent about, then we will punish. All right. So because of all that, she talks about this avidity to punish is always dangerous to liberty. And then she's doing what feels like the same thing. And she said, it leads men to stretch, misinterpret, and misapply even the best of laws. I don't see why we would be told to cease and desist. I don't see what litigation could come from this. She's a good lawyer, so I'm sure she could figure it out. But honestly, it feels like it would take men and women stretching, misinterpreting, and misapplying the best of laws to get us there. So again, I agree with so much of this post, but I'm struggling with what I'm actually seeing from my fellow Christian here. Okay. And I'm not talking, she's not my attorney. I'm not just talking about her as an attorney. This is just kind of a fellow Christian. All of a sudden I'm connected with, and I'm having concerns. I'm having struggles. All right. She says, he that would make his own liberty secure must guard even his enemy from oppression. I'm sure that the ministry she was representing probably felt like I was their enemy. I was trying to expose something that they don't like. The SAI was their enemy. But again, she's teaching for liberty, we must guard even our enemy from oppression. So even if she thought that we were this ministry's enemy, that we were her enemy, that we were on the wrong side of this, well, guarding us from oppression, guarding our rights of freedom of press and freedom of speech, guarding our rights to report on a public transparency issue about a very public-facing ministry in the church, it feels like it's the opposite. The cease and desist felt like oppression to me. And for if he violates his duty, he establishes a precedent that will reach to himself. And I'm concerned that's exactly what she's doing. And a lot of places when she talks about America and the government, you're going to see I just mark it out and I bring it back to the church because that's my wheelhouse. And she's a Christian. So as fellow Christians, I think we got to care about the church more than we even care about the government. She says the actual future of America depends on it. I think you could say the same thing. The actual future of the church depends on this. It depends on us removing the avidity to publish. It depends on us protecting even our enemies and people we disagree with from oppression, not establishing precedents of silencing people. I think the church really does depend on it. And that's why we couldn't stop reporting just because we got this cease and desist. This is about the church. When the church stays silent, darkness speaks louder. This whole post is about the church and AI. But think about this. When the church stays silent on AI, darkness speaks louder. Absolutely. When the church stays silent on things like NDAs, the darkness speaks louder. Okay. She says, like every powerful tool in history, it will be used for good or evil. An NDA is a similar tool, depending on who holds it, how they wield it, and for what purpose. The real question isn't whether AI or NDAs are dangerous. The real question is whether the church will rise up and steward the power for good or retreat in fear. So here's the thing. This is why we talk about this. When we publish a ministry to the NDA disclosure database, or we do an article on them, we're not saying they're misusing NDAs, but we're saying NDAs that meet our definition of a silencing NDA. Those are documents that can be misused in the wrong hands to silence people. And since the church is supposed to be above reproach, something she's missing here, since the church is supposed to be above reproach, we don't need to just say, hey, could this be used in the wrong hands? We need to have discussions about putting parameters in place that make sure it can't be used in the wrong way. Because at the end of the day, love of our neighbor and protecting one another, serving one another is the chief aim of the church through so much of the New Testament. And she says we don't want to leave it in the hands of those who would distort, corrupt, or weaponize it. And because there has been so much distortion, so much corruption, and so much weaponization of silencing NDAs, that's why we do these reports. many of the churches that we're going to report on, they're probably not using NDAs for any bad reason, but it can so easily be used for corruption that we have to stand up to it. Okay. She says, for too long, continuing, the church has allowed itself to be paralyzed by fear driven narratives and mystical paranoia, surrendering on the front lines of culture. I think NDAs promote fear driven narratives. If you say something you're not supposed to say, we will sue and we have more money. That's what that feels like. As someone who has been on the other end of receiving one, that's what that feels like, Chris Ann. So that's why we're dealing with this, because we agree for too long, the church has been paralyzed by fear and driven by paranoia. What if someone, oh my gosh, what if that staff member says something that hurts our reputation? That's a paranoid pastor. You don't need an NDA for that. God will take care of you, okay? That is causes fear on the signer's side, and it's fear and paranoia from the people who are giving it, in my opinion, and from my experience, okay? And I believe NDAs are exactly what you're talking about right there, surrendering the front lines of culture, because NDA is a tool of the corporate world. It is a cultural tool of the business world today. I don't see why it should be a tool for churches, but if churches and ministries are going to use the tool, I just think that the people of the church and the parishioners and their donors and their supporters should know. That's all we're saying, okay? But again, I continue to agree with her. Without a fight, that is not faith, it's cowardice. Without a fight to at least have important discussions about NDAs, I think that's right. I don't think that's faith. I don't think that's good Christianity. I think it's cowardice, which is why, I'm just trying to extrapolate your own words here. I don't think you're a coward. I think you're awfully bold, Chris Ann. But as I look at Chris Ann, that the thing she called cowardice with the church, I felt like it feels like that's what ministry sending cease and desist letters and refusing to have conversations with us about NDAs, that feels like cowardice too. This feels like the same thing. Again, am I crazy or are you seeing the same stuff too? These are just my opinions. So maybe I'm way off base, but I feel like we're seeing, as she's warning against the evangelical industrial complex, she's warning against the molding of the church to culture, the molding of church to corporate, the molding of church to government. I feel like we're literally seeing it even in some of the things she's potentially protecting when sending that letter. Okay. But if the church sits on the sidelines, silent, skeptical, and spiritually disengaged, then yes, evil will take the wheel, not because AI or NDAs are evil, but because good people failed to show up. And that's why I don't understand, because for Chris Ann, I keep thinking that's why SAI is not sitting on the sideline. We're part of the church. We're not sitting on the sidelines, and we're not asking other people to sit on the sidelines. We're asking parishioners to have conversations about NDAs. You can land in a different place than us. That's fine. But we think these conversations are needed. And the damage NDAs do, it doesn't come because NDAs are evil. It comes because good Christians have failed to show up and have conversations about this. NDAs have just been used and they have been signed and they have been shrouded in secret. And good people are getting hurt because we haven't stood up. So again, it meant this person feels like someone who I would support and would really support us in our work and our views on the church in a lot of ways. And then all of a sudden, that's where we're getting a cease and desist letter from that corporate, legal, silencing tool being put into a conversation between two people in the church from two Christian ministries. It felt weird to me. Maybe I'm the only one. She says, so this is the moment not to retreat, but to advance. I agree on NDAs, and that's why we're advancing. That's why we can't honor cease and desist. To declare that truth and love and justice and wisdom still matter. And we agree with that, especially the truth part, which is why we want transparency around NDAs. If a church wants to use NDAs, go for it. Just let people know. Use the tool. Let people ask questions about it. They don't have to know everything about everybody who's ever signed an NDA, but they need to know you're using the tool, what the tool looks like, and whether it could potentially be silencing. Okay. Again, we just think truth and transparency, it prevents a lot of abuses. So that's why we want that. To remind the world that God's people are not afraid of the future, we build it, we shape it, we redeem it. And at SAI, we're trying to build the future of the church and ministry. We're trying to shape it. We're trying to redeem it. Cease and desist letters from other fellow Christians makes it a little hard, but we're trying. The church must stop being weak. The time for fear is over. Exactly. And we think the time for fear is over, which is why NDA should at least come into the light. If they're going to be used, come into the light. There's great questions of whether they should be used or not, but people will land in different places on that. We definitely think transparency is a big place for that. And we're asking the church to stop being weak and to stop hiding things and to have big boy and big girl conversations about uncomfortable topics like this. The time for fear is over. The time to lead is now. We're trying to lead, Chris Ann, making it a little hard with the cease and desist, but it's a good thing that we are not silenced by such things. She says you don't save the republic by setting aside the very protections that make it a republic and not a kingdom. I put that that's a reverse, just as a reminder. In the church, we're a part of a kingdom and not a republic. So the legal stuff is cool, and I appreciate your legal work, your constitutional work. The corporate stuff is cool, all of that, but we're a kingdom, not a government, not any of that. We're kingdom people. That's what Jesus said, and Jesus is our king. We're aliens and strangers, foreigners in this world, okay, because we're kingdom people. She says you don't defend the Constitution by ignoring it. And I would say the same thing, Chris Ann, you don't defend the Bible by ignoring it. And I think we have to ignore some very significant parts of the Bible if we're using things like NDAs and hiding those, particularly when money is involved at times. And there's just all kinds of different things. I think we have to ignore loving our neighbor as ourselves. I think we have to ignore treating our neighbor the way we want to be treated. I think we have to ignore all the passages on truth and transparency and things in darkness coming to light if we're hiding the use of practices like NDAs. Again, if you're going to use them, just don't hide them. She says, and make no mistake, that's exactly how the enemy wins. I agree. The enemy wins when we hide things and don't talk about things, not by brute force, but by deception, using fear, chaos, and confusion to manipulate people into trading liberty, freedom for the illusion of safety. That is what NDAs do, or what silencing NDAs can do. They're in secret, and by deception, because they're in secret, they use fear, chaos, and confusion. You just lost your job. You're not going to get any money if you don't sign this NDA and get a severance. That's what happens in many cases, not every case, okay? So if you don't have this, you can't take care of your family. So you got to sign this to take care of your family. That's fear, that's chaos, that's confusion. And it allows people to trade their freedom to talk about things going on honestly in the church and the ministry for the illusion of safety. If I could just get that extra paycheck, then I can put groceries on the table and I will be safe. And then 6 months later, they are walking around with trauma because they feel like they are controlled and being caused to lie by their NDA. I've heard this too many times, Chris Ann. This is real. She says history has seen this before. Destabilization breeds desperation. Destabilization would be losing your job or being removed from a volunteer role, all those sort of things. That's destabilizing. That makes you desperate. Desperation, like I need that extra paycheck, breeds compromise. So now I sign this NDA committing to be silent about things I'm not sure I need to be silent about for the money. And compromise driven by ignorance. People don't know, which is another part of why we're doing this project. We want people to be educated about NDAs, how they can be used, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of that. We just want them to be educated and have transparency, because driven by ignorance, it convinces people that giving up just a little bit of freedom will buy them just enough security to live in peace. That sounds exactly like an NDA with a severance payment attached to it. She talks about there being puppet masters and even members of Congress having strings, the world being a stage. And I agree with that. Yet we're out here trying not to be controlled by the puppet masters. We're out here trying not to perform on a stage and bring real conversations to the church. And again, we get a cease and desist letter from a person talking about the puppet masters. It just felt odd. Okay. I told you politicians would blame the judge for not releasing Epstein evidence. They don't want you to know this truth. But now that you know, ask yourself why. And regardless of how you feel about the Epstein files, I would say we could replace that with surely pastors would blame people like us for trying to make them look bad when all we're asking them to do is be transparent about their NDAs, release their use of NDAs. I agree. A lot of churches don't want us to know the truth, just like a lot of governments don't want us to know the truth. And you had a great question, Chris Ann. Now that you know, there are some churches and ministries who don't want you to know the truth. And now that you know, some ministries even send cease and desists when articles are being written about them. Well, now that you know that, I think it's important to ask yourself why. So for those of you that are watching, that are reading the articles, even for Chris Ann, I would ask yourself why. Because I think Chris Ann and I would probably get along on a whole lot of stuff and agree on a whole lot of stuff. But it feels like the reason why we're disagreeing here, feels like the reason why we're on opposite ends is because we're on the opposite ends of the evangelical industrial complex. I'm over here trying to, say, hey, let's shine a light on all that stuff so that we can separate it from the church. And then it feels like, to me, at least my opinion, that she's actively a part of it and trying to bring that back into this conversation. I've been a part of the evangelical industrial complex before too, so I get it. I just don't want to be anymore. She talks about presidential immunity here with President Obama. Beyond that, he doesn't have immunity. He has favor based on power, influence, fear, or cowardice. And then she says a little truth goes a long way. And this applies to all presidents. I think you could say a little truth goes a long way. And yes, this applies to pastors, because there are too many pastors, church leaders, evangelists, ministry leaders who have power and favor based on power, the misuse of power, influence, fear, and cowardice. That's, again, another reason why we're trying to bring transparency around NDAs, because NDAs can be used to cover that kind of leadership up. We do believe a little truth goes a long way. So a small truth, not sharing the NDA, not sharing the pieces of the NDA, but simply saying this ministry is reported to use an NDA. Sharing a little truth goes a long way because it can start a lot of conversations. And I think, just like you say that applies to all presidents, I think that applies to all pastors. Again, just as a pastor and a theologian, that's my wheelhouse, and that's what I see. I could understand as an attorney, you thinking more corporate and you thinking more just legally. But again, I'm a pastor, I'm a theologian, I'm a part of a ministry trying to create safe churches, transparent churches. So, man, I'm just thinking church, Bible, it's a little different. It's kingdom first, then the other stuff, all of that. She's talking about omnibus bills here. And she says omnibus bills are, and I think you could replace omnibus bills with NDAs. NDAs are unbiblical. She says unconstitutional. I think NDAs are as unbiblical as omnibus bills are unconstitutional. Tyrannical. I think NDAs are as tyrannical as omnibus bills are. Corrupt. I think they can be. Whether that's the intent or not, I think the document itself can be. Deceptive. I think the document's always deceptive if it's in secret. Okay. Which is, again, we're just trying to get it out of secret. I do think it's irresponsible in a lot of cases. I think there are better ways to go, but it's definitely irresponsible to do it in secret. She says omnibus bills are anti-Republican. I would say NDAs are in a lot of ways anti-Christian. Doesn't mean you can't be a Christian and use one. I just don't see that being Christian principles leading us to use them. She says omnibus bills are cowardly. I would say that NDAs in churches, silencing NDAs that are kept secret, are cowardly. She says they're not merely anti-American, they're a betrayal of the very republic itself. And I would say NDAs are not merely anti-Christian, they're a betrayal of the faith itself. Secret NDAs that silence people. Now, again, if NDAs aren't secret, that's different. Not every NDA will be used to silence people, but we're trying to make sure that those that can and those that do, that those are exposed and people are educated about NDAs in general. She says, until we possess the boldness to call it what it truly is, crafty politicians and greedy opportunists will continue to cloak their corruption and procedure and get away with deception. And I think the same thing is true about NDAs, pastors, evangelists, ministry leaders, all of that. Until we as the church have the boldness to call it what it is, a corporate silencing strategy that the church has adopted, then we're going to see corruption and procedure. We're going to see these things continue to be cloaked in deception and secrecy, and people get away with deception. Again, do you guys see, am I off here, or do you see the hypocrisy I'm talking about within the evangelical industrial complex? This is a person, I believe KrisAnne's a Christian. I believe she loves Jesus. I believe she cares about the church. I'm not sure she sees how much of the very thing she's arguing against it looks to be potentially becoming a part of here. Okay. And then she continues talking about omnibus bills, and she says again, crafty politicians, greedy opportunities will continue to cloak these things in secrecy and deception. How is that different from the way the church operates with NDAs? She shares another article about the crackdown on flag burning, raising free speech concerns. And even though she's against flag burning, she talks about we've got to be very careful to stop people's free speech from an attorney's perspective. Again, I see where she's coming from on a lot of that. And she even says the president desperately needs a real constitutional advisor. Okay. She's sharing, see at the bottom, some constitutional truth for you. She says you can hate flag burning. You can despise it. It can make your blood boil. You can hate us talking about NDAs. You can hate us writing these articles. It can make your blood boil. Doesn't change the truth. So I'm with you. But if you understand liberty, the very foundation of America, you know that you cannot support government limits on free speech just because it offends you. Um, Again, my concern there is it felt like the cease and desist letter. When I got that from Chris Ann, it felt like a ministry and a lawyer trying to limit our free speech and our freedom of press because what we were writing about offended them. When it's all factual, we're asking for their comment. We're trying to share their side fairly. We're trying to be fair and honoring in all of it. Yet, because it offends you, all of a sudden we're supposed to cease and desist, not write about it, not try to be fair, not do any of that. She says the protection of speech we disagree with. I agree that's constitutional truth. I'm just not sure why that constitutional truth applies to the ministries that we're writing about and it doesn't apply to our ministry and our freedom of press. Again, I think you may be looking at this a little one sided. She talks again about Trump publicly calling on Pam Bondi to release the Epstein grand jury files. And she talks about a bunch of things that you need to know. But she says, even if the records are released, because it sounds like she would like those released based on the multiple posts, which I understand, they will almost certainly be heavily redacted, limiting public access to critical details. And that's the problem. Even when we're sharing NDAs right now, we have to redact so many things. It limits public transparency and details farther than we want, but we have to do that to try to be as fair as possible to these ministries. And we have to do that so that we don't get sued into oblivion by ministries with overzealous lawyers trying to make a buck off the evangelical industrial complex. And I'm not talking about Chris Ann here because she's doing, when she sent the cease and desist, it was through a nonprofit trying to help churches. But a lot of these lawyers that are working for churches, they see a cash cow. It's not a nonprofit. It's not a ministry for them. They're trying to make a buck, right? And she's going to talk about those overzealous lawyers here in just a second because I think we would agree on that. Okay, she just continues talking about this stuff. In this post, she says, so here's a challenge. Ask your favorite politician to show you where in the Constitution the spending she's talking about is authorized. Watch them deflect, dodge, and redefine words entirely. I would encourage you, I want to challenge you to do the same thing with your pastor. Ask your favorite pastor where in the Bible NDA use is authorized. Ask your pastor where in the Bible cease and desist letters between believers is authorized. And watch them deflect, dodge, and redefine words entirely. If we just apply Chris Ann's view of the government to the church and we put the same importance on the Bible as the Constitution, which I think the Bible has way more importance, then I don't think we get things like cease and desist letters. And I think, we have conversations through the church. They only scream constitutional when it's someone else's pile of taxpayer money. And she calls for integrity across the board. I find that ministries only call foul when they're on the other end of it, right? She talks about some protests and how people have no idea. Americans are not taught about the group that she sees behind a lot of these protests. Our own government doesn't want us to know how to identify them and what to do to defeat them. They want us to remain fundamentally ignorant. And I feel like a lot of pastors and churches and ministry leaders are doing the same things about NDAs. They don't teach us about them. They don't want us to know about them, how to identify them, how to stop them or deal with them or ask questions about them. They want us to remain fundamentally ignorant. Okay. And she talks about an early warning from one of our, I believe, founding fathers. Every generation is tempted to believe that peace can be bought by handing over liberty, but that exchange always ends the same way. The peace becomes the prison, the liberty becomes the chain. And I think that happens a lot of times with NDAs in the church. There is no justification, not fear, not crisis, not even patriotism. You could say there is no justification, not fear, not crisis, the loss of your job, not even unity in the church for setting aside the Bible. Again, if we just go by what she's teaching, I think we'd be more on the same page. But when the evangelical industrial complex starts bleeding church practices into corporate practices, we can just get confused, I think. She says there's no justification for fear crisis in the Bible. There's no good reason enough to expand government power just this once, just like I think there's not a good reason to expand church powers to broad silencing NDAs or ministry powers. She says the people lose more than you realize and it's too late to get it back. I think that 100% applies to NDAs. And Chris Ann, I don't know if you've ever signed one from a church as a parishioner or a staff member, but I can tell you as someone who deals with this every day and has been a part of this, people lose more than you realize. They lose more than you realize. That's why we do this. She talks about things you can do. Always choose liberty over the illusion of security. Works with the NDAs. Always love the freedom that belongs to your children and grandchildren more than your own temporary comfort. That literally, there are a lot of these NDAs from ministries that say they apply to all of your heirs and successors for generations. I cared more about my kids than signing an NDA and then them being scared to talk bad about a ministry or something like that. Because when the dust settles, history won't ask how safe we felt. It will ask whether we were free and whether we were faithful enough to keep it that way. Can I get an amen? And I would say, Chris Ann, you can get a amen from me. You can also get a this applies to NDA use in the church, which is why your cease and desist had to, it could not stop us from posting the article. But again, do you see how the hypocrisy of the evangelical industrial complex causes us, how we look at the church as Christians, to just get wonky? She talks about a double standard. Those who challenge power are punished, and those who protect it, no matter how vile their crimes, are shielded. That isn't justice. It's feudalism with better PR. And I agree that we need a reminder, because we're challenging power and we're challenging potentially harmful documents in the church. And we're being punished or threatened to be punished through things like cease and desist and smear campaigns and everything else. Yet the people, the pastors, the influencers, the friends, the big donors, the lawyers, the people who are protecting the power, no matter how vile, their crimes are shielded. Their actions are shielded. Their behaviors are shielded. Crimes is a very strong word, but that was her word about the government. I just think we got to be careful when trying to protect people against having truth spoken or even opinion spoken. She talks about the government system. She says the system, and again, this is on Kenneth Copeland's network, the system needs reform. That's true. But the reality is the biggest break in the system is when the rule of law is not followed. I would say the system of the church needs reform. And the biggest break in the system is when the Bible is not followed, when Christian principles are not followed, the fruit of the Spirit, all that sort of stuff. She talks about a truth that most people don't hear. And this is how we're going to end up finishing, because I think this tells us about the money intersection very powerfully. She says, here's the truth most people will never hear. Wealthy people don't hate lawyers. They rely on them. They know you don't stay rich without legal protection. Now, we have legal protection, and it's very hard to keep that legal protection because, again, SAI has brought in less than $40,000 for the entire year. We have no W-2 employees. We only pay for completed projects. Nobody's getting rich off this. Nobody's making a living off of it. There's not enough for anybody to even make a living off of it, okay? And much of the money we're spending is not going directly to work that is being done outside of, it's going to projects, it's going to support, it's going to editors, it's going to lawyers, it's going all that, okay? But she talks about wealthy people loving lawyers, relying on lawyers, knowing you don't stay rich without legal protection. And it's just a good reminder, we are over here struggling sometimes to tell the truth. We are. It's just the reality. We're not, it's not pitiful, poor me. It's just, it is what it is. Yet we try to report about reported NDA use by a ministry like Ankit Rambabu Ministries, who she was representing with her cease and desist. And you got a ministry that's brought in more than $1 million every year since their inception, it looks like. And all of a sudden they're getting lawyers. And it just makes me wonder. I don't know that this is true. This is just a question. Is it because they know you can't stay rich as a ministry and you can't keep the money coming in if you don't have legal protection? She says every day people are conditioned to distrust lawyers, but that leaves you financially vulnerable. For us, dealing with lawyers is not about being financially vulnerable. It's about being above reproach and making sure we can do this mission. But I'll tell you what, Chris Ann, I don't distrust lawyers just in general. I distrust lawyers because of things like cease and desist over what I see as fair reporting. That makes me distrust lawyers. I'm grateful that I have good lawyers in my life, good attorneys in my life who I think are setting really good examples. And you're probably doing that in a lot of ways as well. The cease and desist seemed a little weird though. Meanwhile, or she says, if you want to build and protect real wealth, having a lawyer in your corner isn't optional. It's essential. Do you want to build wealth? Start acting like a person with wealth. Do you see the thing here? Is it possible that a lot of this legal posturing, is it possible that things like NDAs, is it possible that these corporate tools, is it possible that so much of this evangelical industrial complex, these issues, is it possible that it's all about the money? And it's all about creating wealth, and that coming back to a very biblical historical perspective of the church that is not connected to corporation, not connected to government, not connected to money, is it possible that people are fighting that because it affects their wealth? I don't know. It's a good question that you brought up there. If you love wealth better than liberty, may your chains be set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you were our countrymen. She says it was never about the money, it was always about liberty. Yeah, you were talking a lot about money. I think other people in ministry talk a lot about money. They make you fearful of litigation because of money. And I would say it's not about money, it's about truth. It's about following Jesus. It's about the fruit of the Spirit. It's about the Bible. So yeah, for us, it's not about money, but it just makes me wonder how much of this is just how much of these things that we're fighting and these conversations that we're having and people trying to stop them, how much of it is about the money? And I don't know that we'll know that answer, but I think it's important to ask. Here's the undeniable reality. If you take money from the government, your spending will be regulated. If you don't want oversight, audits, or this is important, strings attached, don't take the money. It's that simple. And I would say money coming from the church in the form of an NDA is going to have strings attached. And I agree with Chris in here, but about NDAs in the church, I wouldn't take them. I would not sign an NDA if money is attached because I think it's that simple. It's not complicated, she says. When the government gives out money, it's not handing out its own wealth, and neither is the church. The church is not distributing tax dollars. The church is redistributing donor dollars. And if you ever been a donor to a church or a ministry, I just bet that you don't want your donor dollars and the money you're sacrificially giving and tithing and everything else. I bet you don't want it going to NDAs and severance payments and litigation and all that sort of stuff. Government money, she says, comes with government control. And I would say church money also comes with church control. So I think as we get to the end here, she's given us a lot of information about how money plays a role in all of this. She's talking about some stuff going on in Florida and says it's time to take a stand. I think it's time to take a stand as Christians. Why should lawmakers be allowed to violate U.S. law and prioritize non-citizens? I would say, why should pastors and church leaders be able to violate biblical principles just for the sake of corporate tools? I think it's a good question. Why should we tolerate politicians who refuse or who put our communities at risk? Why should we tolerate pastors who put our church communities at risk? Again, we're not even saying that every church that uses NDAs does that, but we're saying it's possible, especially when they're hidden, which is why we want to bring transparency to this issue. I agree, enough is enough. But I think we got to start with the church because the scripture says judgment starts in the house of God. She talks again about the president. He should have had better advisors. He should have known these things that were going on with this person. And she finishes with truth is always available. And I would say truth is always available to the church. It's not about if you have something to hide. It's about what you have to protect. That's why I'm liberty first always. And I would say with the church, it's not about whether you're actively trying to hide something or not. It's about what we have to protect our brothers and sisters in Christ, loving our neighbor as we love ourselves, treating our neighbor the way we want to be treated. And we do this work and we bring transparency to NDAs because we want to protect our brothers and sisters in Christ. She talks about when each branch of the government stays in its lane, liberty is protected. I would say when the church stays in the lane of the church and stays separate from the lanes of corporate, from the lanes of legal, from the lanes of money, from the lanes of government, from the lanes of influence and celebrity, I would say when the church stays clear of all those lanes, the biblical church is protected. And when we start merging with those lanes, we end up with an evangelical industrial complex that at times looks very little like the biblical church. This post she reshared from the president about BOI, which was a report that businesses were having to make that a lot of businesses felt like infringed on their rights. She says, no more BOI. I bet there are a bunch of scamming lawyers and accountants mad about this, and I'm glad. And again, I'm not saying that Chris Ann is a scamming lawyer or anything like that. Those are her words. But I think there's a lot of lawyers and accountants and everybody else who are glad about NDA use, who are glad or who are mad when we report on NDA use. They're mad when those things get exposed. They're mad when people find out. Probably mad enough to send cease and desist letters and everything else. Probably mad enough to go, man, this is going to expose practices that make us all money. I get that. I feel like people feel that way a lot of times about the NDA stuff, but just like you being glad that BOI was overturned, even if it made these people mad, we're willing for people to get mad to have transparency around things like NDAs. And I just want to use the last few just kind of posts I want to show. I want to use Chris Ann's own words to ask some questions, not only about this situation with her, but more so about the evangelical industrial complex. Again, she is much more willing to call people names and do things like that than I am. I don't ever want to attack somebody's character. But she says and this was a post of her being interviewed on the news. Once again, MSNBC has a complete idiot as an expert. Now, I would challenge Chris Ann. I would encourage her as a Christian to look at Jesus' instructions about not calling people Raka. That could potentially have some overlap here. Idiot's a pretty strong word. But once again, MSNBC is a complete idiot as an expert. And I do understand her concerns, even though it's tough language. Sometimes you have people who are experts. They are really experts and they're appearing as experts, but they're not using their expertise wisely. And I would ask you, based on everything you've seen from Chris Ann, but also thinking about other Christian attorneys like this, is it wise when experts in law who are also Christians partner with ministries and churches to send cease and desist to journalists? I'm going to let you decide. She also says this, which I think is important and relevant. Don't get bullied by the leftist. They can't handle it when you have the facts. And again, using her own words, because I think they're well, but let's apply this to the church. Don't get bullied by ministries with a lot of money. Don't get bullied by celebrity pastors. Don't get bullied by threatening letters from attorneys. They can't handle it when you have the facts. And I will say, when we're doing articles on NDAs or adding a church or a ministry to the NDA database, we have receipts. We have more receipts than we publish. So anytime anybody wants to take us to court, it's our preference not to do that. But one, we've got receipts. Two, I think most ministries don't want to open themselves up to discovery because I think that potentially exposes the very documents and practices they're trying not to expose. But that's just me. I would just encourage you, though, whether it's a church leader who is bullying you into silence for unity, whether you're doing work like this, it's lawyers, maybe you said something and your church sends you as a parishioner, a cease and desist. I just wouldn't be bullied by those things if you're telling the truth. We can stand on the truth and stand on the facts. And then finally, again, using her own words, you see Chris Ann there. She's talking about Hillary Clinton, and she says Hillary is either completely ignorant or completely nefarious. I think you got to decide. And I would just simply say, I don't know whether Chris Ann and others like her in different places where they're Christians, but their livelihoods and their careers are colliding with the church and the evangelical industrial complex. I don't know whether they're ignorant, nefarious, somewhere in between. Same thing with pastors and churches that use NDAs. We don't know if they're ignorant and they just don't know how those NDAs could be used in silencing ways. We don't know if they're nefarious and they're using them to try to silence people and playing dumb. We don't know if it's some mixture or something else. We don't know. That's why we have to post about the NDAs. That's why we have to publish, because it's about public transparency. We can't know that, but through public transparency, we can work through conversations to help protect people. We give a lot of grace for ignorance because a lot of pastors are ignorant about those things, and they should be, because a pastor doesn't need to be an NDA expert. Okay. But we want to help them be less ignorant about those things so that we can protect parishioners. So anyway, I want you to ask, when you think about the evangelical industrial complex, when you think about how this stuff works, when you think about the places where the world is colliding with the church, is it nefarious? Is it ignorant? Is it something in between? Is it sometimes nefarious? Is it sometimes ignorant? As Christians, I think we got to ask a lot of questions, though, because every day the American church, and a lot of times the Western church, is looking more and more like the evangelical industrial complex. It's tangled up in very intricate, complex ways with the world. So I think we got to ask these questions. And if it's nefarious, we got to deal with that. But I would also say if it's ignorant, while we give grace and kindness, ignorance is not an excuse to do things that could hurt people. Ignorance is not an excuse to operate in unbiblical ways. So I think whether it's ignorance or nefarious purposes, I think we got to deal with both. One just gets a lot more grace and a lot more kindness. But let me know what you think. As you listen to all this, I hope that you could hear beyond just our experience with Chris and Hall and just our experience with the evangelical industrial complex and the way that people respond to this. But I hope that you could see overall, in a much broader way, the ways that ministries and churches are just very easily overlapping with worldly systems that I think are causing some problems, getting us in trouble, and definitely taking our eyes off of our biblical mandate. So, what are some ways that you see that happening? Where are some places where you see the overlap that you think we need to address? Go ahead, let me know in the comments, let me know in the chat, because I would love to see that and continue the conversation. But that's it for this one. We'll be back with another video soon. But until then, grace and peace. All right, guys. What I'm going to go ahead and do, this stuff took a little bit longer today than I expected, and we started the stream just a little bit late. So probably not going to dive into the chat here at the end. We've been in and out of the chat a lot. If there's something you put in the chat that you want me to answer, go ahead and leave it in the comments. I'll try to get to it as well, because the chat will go away here in just a second. But we'll go ahead and we'll punt what was going to be segment 3. We'll punt that into our next live stream. Guys, we got a lot more of these reports coming. I'm probably not going to keep talking about all of them on the live stream. Actually, we're probably just going to go to the ones that are, that are kind of unique. The problem is, right off the bat, Life Church was very unique. Seacoast was very unique. And now this cease and desist letter, the whole overlap with the attorney, all that sort of stuff was very unique. So we'll talk about these sometimes on the stream. We won't talk about them all. But I appreciate you guys giving me a ton of patience as over the last month, we've got this NDA database going. We got these reports going. And guys, we never want to manipulate anybody. We never want to make anybody feel guilty. But if you want to see more work like this done, if you want to see us be able to stand up to the system in ways like this more, would you consider making a donation? Recurring donations as small as $5 a month make a huge difference for us. Our average monthly donor gives, I think, about $15 a month. So it doesn't take a huge gift to make a big difference. But when we're dealing with lawyers, when we're dealing with the evangelical industrial complex, when we're dealing with all that, it gets expensive very, very, very quick. And of course, if you want to know where the money's going, you want to know how we're using donor dollars, you can go to spiritualabuse.institute. Go ahead. You can look under the accountability stuff, financial reports. We've got all of that there. I think the last one was through September, and we're about to put out another one at the end of this month. We always want to be as transparent as possible. And if you have questions, just ask. And if you're not in a place where you can support us financially, that is totally okay. Every time you watch, you like, you share, you comment, all of those things actually help us to reach more and more people. But we're trying to do a better job as well of asking. So as we come to the end of this year, or we're coming in the last couple of months of this year, if you're in a place where you can give and you want to support this kind of work, head on over to spiritualabuse.institute. You can click on the Give tab. You can give one time, you can give recurring, but every single penny, guys, every single penny makes a huge difference, because I've got another nonprofit that I'm a big fan of. They're doing great work in this space. Big supporters of them. But I got an email from them the other day that was, multiple thousands of dollars that they were short this month. They were still 75% of the way or 80% of the way to being funded, but they were still multiple thousands of dollars short. And I looked, and literally their monthly budget is double our annual budget. Okay. So we try to do everything we can to maximize donor dollars, to make every dollar that you give count, to spend as little as possible. We don't hire full-time employees. We don't keep people on payroll for a reason, because we want to make sure that people are only being paid for doing this work and getting these things done, that we're focused on you, we're focused on the mission. So, and even with that, that is a fantastic nonprofit. is a fantastic ministry that I support, but it was a good reminder of, man, SAI has been able to do some really massive work, and we've been able to do it on less money and a smaller budget than I think most nonprofits and ministries ever will. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of being able to do good work that is making a change in the church, but also we're very proud of how we handle donor dollars, because we want you to feel comfortable with what we do, and most of all, whether you support us or not, we want to set an example for the church. That's something that we're trying to do. So again, if you're in that place, we'd love to have you partner with us at spiritualabuse.institute. If not, thank you just for supporting the content, for everything that you guys do. We'll have these standalone videos up here over the weekend, so that you can share those. If you've enjoyed something today from a segment, you can share that in a little bit more of a digestible form. But I love you guys. I am grateful for you, and we'll be back next week, hopefully on a more consistent live stream schedule. And but with some of this NDA work, there is a chance that our live stream schedule is going to change soon. I'm not sure. We're looking at all of that, but trying to make sure that we're balancing these very important projects, and that we're making content, but that's not all that we're doing. But anyway, I love you guys. I'll see you soon. Grace and peace.